Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. American Comics. Man in Marvel, host of Venom. Chapter 81. The noisy sound attracted everyone's attention. On the other side of the banquet hall, a man with a unique beard was aiming at a small red ball. Bang! With a crisp sound, the red ball bounced off the table, and then fell into the champagne glasses neatly arranged in a triangle on the opposite side of the table. Oh! As the ball fell into the cup, the man with a unique beard also let out a strange cry, and then led the surrounding crowd to cheer together. Come on, Hammer, take this drink. You won't be able to drink it anymore, right? The man hugged the waists of the two female companions next to him, while looking at Justin Hammer opposite him with a somewhat bitter look on his face. Looking at the booing crowd around him, Justin Hammer smiled awkwardly and said, "Hee, Tony, your game is really good." Justin Hammer is the controller of Hammer Industries. Like Tony Stark, he is an arms dealer. However, as both arms dealers, there is still a very obvious gap between Hammer Industries and Stark Industries. This is well reflected in the popularity of the two of them. My game is really good. This game is just one aspect. There are other games that I am better at, but it's just not suitable for you to show them here. Tony Stark hugged his female companions on both sides with a smirk, and continued to urge Justin Hammer. Hammer, drink up the wine, our game is not over yet. Justin Hammer heard the words and couldn't write any more ink, so he could only pick up the wine glass and force himself into it. He really regretted talking to this playboy just now, and he was forced to form a game without talking a few words. It's not very decent to play games in such a banquet hall. He is not Tony Stark, he still needs to save face. The most important thing is that he can't play games with Tony Stark at all. Now he has drank more than a dozen glasses in a row, while Tony Stark only drank a few glasses. Justin Hammer put the finished wine glass on the table, feeling a little bloated in his stomach, and the French foie gras he just ate seemed to be soaked, dangling in his throat. Let's end the game here. I had a lot of fun today, let's spread out. Hammer waved to the surrounding crowd after drinking the cup. He drank so much, and the booing people next to him were also responsible. These people watching the excitement were no big deal, they just came to see his jokes. Ooh, it's really boring. Tony Stark threw the ball on the table and raised his eyebrows in boredom. He didn't want to come to this kind of meaningless banquet, but there was no way. Stanislav insisted on letting him come, in order to keep him in touch with the high society in New York. Stannis' full name is Obadiah Stannis, who used to be the partner of Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark. When Howard Stark died and Tony Stark hadn't grown up yet, he was also in charge of the Stark Group for a while. After Tony Stark started to take charge of the Stark Group at the age of 21, he also assisted Tony Stark just like he assisted Howard Stark back then. Although Tony Stark is talented and has designed many world-leading weapons for the Stark Group, he is not very good at handling the group's trivial matters, so Obadiah Stane has always been in charge of this aspect. He also came to the banquet tonight at the strong request of Obadiah Stanislav, and after coming, it was as boring as he expected. After finally catching Justin Hammer, he set up a temporary game session, but he didn't expect that this guy couldn't play games, and he couldn't handle alcohol, so he couldn't continue playing after a while. It turned out to be Tony Stark. This person is still as flamboyant as before. Wilson Fisk watched the farce over there, and said, taking a sip of the wine in his hand. Poor Justin Hammer, he always likes to lean on other important figures, but this makes him look like a clown even more. Norman Osborn looked at the embarrassed Justin Hammer and shook his head. Actually, he still has some talents. There is no need to do this at all, if he can devote his mind to weapon design. Chen Linon and Felicia also looked at each other after hearing this. They had a tacit understanding and didn't say anything. It would be better not to evaluate other people for this kind of thing. After all, they are not like Norman Osborn and Wilson Fisk. Have certain status, age and experience support. While they were discussing, Tony Stark also walked over with two enchanting women in his arms. Looking at Wilson Fisk, Tony Stark also lowered his head slightly and hooked the sunglasses on his face with his fingers, and then said in a playful tone, "It turned out to be Fisk. Looking at your head, I thought Obadiah it's here too. Stark, you are still so humorous." Wilson Fisk said with a smile. "Oh, who is this beautiful lady?" Tony Stark didn't continue to pay attention to Wilson Fisk, but turned his head to look at Felicia and asked. Although Felicia didn't like playboys like Tony Stark, she still smiled and replied out of politeness, "Hello, Mr. Stark, I'm Felicia Hardy." Felicia subconsciously leaned towards Chen Linan and said to Tony Stark. Seeing Felicia's appearance, Tony Stark naturally wouldn't say anything out of spite, but just nodded. But after hearing Chen Linan's name, Tony Stark also turned his head to look at him and said leisurely, "I've heard your name before, Industry Zero, right?" Chen Linan also smiled politely when he heard this and said, "Yes, I didn't expect Mr. Stark to have heard it too. This makes me a little surprised. Your invention is amazing. Obadiah mentioned it to me before." Facing Chen Linan, the banter in Tony Stark's tone faded away. After all, he is also a scientist and knows what kind of technology the other party's invention has, content. But it's still worse than me, haha. After just being serious, Tony Stark returned to his usual self-confidence. Chen Linan's invention was indeed recognized by him, but he still felt that there was still some gap between him and himself. "Keep up the good work." Tony patted Chen Linan on the shoulder, then turned around and left with his arms around the two enchanting women. Although it was just a few simple exchanges, Chen Linan did feel the special character of Tony Stark, the world-renowned weapons tycoon and leader of Stark Industries. Really, it is indeed a bit coquettish, the kind that can dazzle everyone's eyes. Chen Linan secretly complained in his heart, and only the two words, "Washa," can fully express his feelings for Tony Stark. "This guy is really rude," Norman Osborn said in a deep voice with a slightly uneasy expression. Tony greeted everyone around him, including Chen Linan, the new kid, but he just missed him. Since the other party didn't intend to talk to him, of course it was impossible for him to speak up out of nowhere, but this state made other people feel a little lonely when they saw it. Norman Osborn believed that Tony Stark, an incomprehensible guy, probably jumped over him unconsciously because he suddenly saw Felicia, but despite this, he was still a little embarrassing in the eyes of others. Hearing Norman Osborn's words, Wilson Fisk raised the corner of his mouth unobtrusively, and he was very relieved to see the other party being ignored. During this period of time, in order to paralyze Norman Osborn, he cooperated with the other party very politely, and then slowly infiltrated the shareholders of the Osborn Group in the dark. But Norman Osborn seemed to regard his politeness and cooperation as a sign of weakness, and became more and more arrogant when facing him, which made him endure extremely hard. Chen Linan and Felicia didn't express any opinions on this. After chatting with them for a while, they walked to the other side. It's this kind of small talk that makes people feel the most tired," Felicia said as she took a long breath. The fresh air made her head that was bored by the conversation clear a lot. Chen Linan also took a big breath of fresh air. It was also the first time for him to experience so many people chatting together on this occasion, which really made people feel tired. Looking at the bustling street and the beautiful night view below, Chen Linan also turned his head to look at Felicia and suggested, "I don't know when the party will end, why don't we sneak out for a drive?" After hearing Chen Linan's proposal, the eyes of Felicia, who also loves racing, lit up. Good idea. It was obvious that she really had no patience for this boring party. They hit it off immediately and decided to sneak out of the venue after a while and go to the garage to get the car. The evening breeze was blowing, which was a good time for racing. "Then you wait for me at the door for a while, I'll go to the bathroom, and we'll set off when we get back." Felicia, who was full of energy and eager to try, handed the wine glass in her hand to Chen Linan and said. Hearing this, Chen Linan also took the cup, and then walked towards the door. He had already greeted all the people who should be greeted just now, and such a party would be very boring to him. While there was still a while, Venom also urged him to go to the dessert table to get some more chocolate. It could be seen that the chocolate tonight was more to his taste. Felicia was always there just now, so Venom didn't have a chance to taste it. When Chen Linan went to the dessert table to feed the Venom, James also walked into the venue with Peter Parker and Robbie. This was the first time Peter Parker came to such a banquet, so he seemed a little reserved. "Listen up, Parker. The people who are coming to the party today are all famous people. You have to take good photos. I don't want the photos on the front page tomorrow to be a pile of rubbish." James picked up the champagne served by the waiter next to him, exhorted Peter Parker. Maybe you can change the style of your Spider-Man photos. The style of today's party is different from that of the wall crawler. Peter is completely immune to James's words like wall crawlers. After all, if he really cares so much, he will have a hypertensive cerebral hemorrhage within 2 days. He raised the camera in his hand and said confidently, "No problem, sir, I am an all-rounder. I can take good photos of people and landscapes." Robbie next to him patted him on the shoulder and said to James, "Peter is the best photographer in our newspaper office, James must have confidence in him." James snorted and turned his head when he heard this, and then walked inside and said, "I hope so. I'll go say hello to them first, and you can wander around as you like." Looking at James's back, Robbie also smiled at Peter and said, "I'm going to the bathroom. You can stroll around and have something to eat or a drink." "No problem." After Peter said that, he started walking around the venue, and James would ask him to come over and take photos when needed. "Say eggplant, very good, finished shooting." Peter put down the camera and nodded to James. Originally, he was going to eat something, but before he took 2 steps, James called him over to take a photo. After taking the photo, he looked around and wanted to eat something. Just as he was still looking for where the buffet table was, a loud noise suddenly interrupted his train of thought. I saw that a big hole was blown out of one side of the wall and window of the banquet hall. At the damaged hole, several mechanical tentacles climbed up, leading a middle-aged man wearing sunglasses to the hall. Dr. Octopus stood on the ground, looking at the frightened people in the hall, with a sarcastic smile on his face. "Good evening, you bright fools." While he was talking to him, Phoenicia and Robbie, as well as several people who were using the bathroom, came out of the passage next to them. There was such a big commotion, of course they had to come and see what was going on. Dr. Octopus also saw Felicia beside him, with an evil smile on his face, and walked straight towards her. "I really didn't expect you to deliver it to my door yourself. It saves me the trouble of looking for it again." One of his mechanical arms directly grabbed Felicia, who was trying to escape, and wrapped her up in midair. Robbie, who was not far from Felicia, hurried forward to stop him, but Dr. Octopus subdued him unceremoniously, and entangled him and lifted him up by the way. After arresting these 2 people, Dr. Octopus also threw 2 bombs while laughing wildly. "I wish you good luck, stupid. Tell the families of these 2 unlucky people, the great Dr. Octopus will contact you. They, hopefully, will have a ransom ready by then." Bang! The 2 bombs made a violent sound, shattering the things nearby, and some people who couldn't dodge were also blown away by the powerful air wave. When the smoke cleared, Dr. Octopus, who was standing here just now, had left with 2 hostages. From the time this strange guy stood on the floor of the living room to the time he left with the 2 hostages, the total time was less than 1 minute. Except for the surrounding guests, no one else realized what happened. "What happened?" James rushed here and asked the person next to him. Standing next to him was a woman who also had blonde hair and looked very capable and shrewd. This was Felicia's mother, Anastasia, also known as Mrs. Hardy. Just now she had been greeting the guests, and then discussed the future cooperation with an important partner. She didn't rush over until she heard a loud noise and ran into James halfway. "A strange man just broke in here. He has 4 robotic arms and said he was Dr. Octopus. He took Felicia and Robbie away." A nearby guest who saw the whole process explained to James and Mrs. Hardy. Another middle-aged man next to him groped his chin and continued, "The man with the mechanical arms should be Dr. Otto. I have seen him before, but for some reason, he suddenly became like this. He also said he would contact you and ask you to prepare a ransom." "Otto, that guy actually took my daughter." Mrs. Hardy was also shocked when she heard the name Otto. She had funded Dr. Otto's laboratory before, but she finally cut off the funding because she couldn't see any results. She didn't expect that this guy would retaliate against her and kidnap her daughter. Anxiety, worry, regret, and anger were all intertwined in Mrs. Hardy's heart. For a moment, he felt dizzy and unsteady. Fortunately, James next to her caught her in time and brought her to sit on the chair next to her. James was also very angry at the moment that stinky octopus actually took away his right-hand man, his friend. Outside the surrounding crowd, Chen Linan had already heard the story of what happened here, and he never expected that such a thing would happen in less than a minute. When did another Dr. Octopus appear in New York? Why don't these people stop? Chen Linan looked serious. Now they can only wait for the weird man named Dr. Octopus to call as soon as possible, otherwise they will have no clues at all. Chen Linan thought as he exited the crowd and walked towards the door. What he needed now was the identity of Venom. Peter in the crowd did not expect such an accident to happen, and he was also thinking carefully about how to deal with this matter. Thinking about it, he also gradually withdrew from the crowd, preparing to become Spider-Man to intervene in this matter. Leon, why is he here too? He had just squeezed out of the crowd when he saw Chen Linan walking out of the hall. Peter scratched his head and turned around to the windowsill without having time to think about it. If Chen Linan was outside the hall, he had to avoid being seen. The attention of all the people present was concentrated in the middle, and no one noticed that the two of them left quietly. Don't worry too much, Anastasia. Otto's main intention should be money. He will definitely not hurt Felicia and Robbie now. It will not be good for both parties. James also sat on the chair, watching Mrs. Hardy next to him said. At this time, the anger in his heart gradually subsided, but Mrs. Hardy next to him was still very worried. For Mrs. Hardy, the most important thing is Felicia's safety, and the ransom paid is not an important thing. Mrs. Hardy was about to respond after hearing what James said, but at this moment the phone on the table rang suddenly. Seeing the phone ringing, everyone's eyes were focused there. Mrs. Hardy also clasped her hands and prayed secretly in her heart. After James's phone rang, he was ready to answer the phone and start negotiating. A friend standing next to him pressed his shoulder and said, Jonah, if it is really him who called, please do whatever it takes. Calm down. Everyone knows that James has a hot temper, and they are afraid that he will say something in a fit of anger that will irritate the kidnappers. Of course, I have always been calm and composed, James said confidently. The friend wanted to say something after hearing the words, but James had already picked up the phone, and he said in a serious and calm tone, Hello, I am Jonah James. At this moment, a middle-aged man's voice came from the other end of the phone. Hi, I'm Dr. Otto. Of course, you can also call me by my current name, Dr. Octopus. I want you to prepare $1,000 million in cash to complete the transaction between us. In addition, I want you to report about me on the news. I want everyone to know what they did to me. Dr. Otto's tone became more and more intense, as if his bad memories were brought back. James paused after hearing this, and then continued in a deep voice, We agree to your conditions. Likewise, you must ensure the safety of Miss Hardy and Robbie. I need to have a phone call with them. Dr. Otto also sneered and said, You are not qualified to negotiate terms with the great Dr. Octopus. James was a little annoyed when he heard Dr. Otto's words. He raised his voice and shouted into the phone, If anything happens to the two of them, I will definitely not let you go. What would you do? You are not qualified to do anything. Dr. Otto mocked James's words. James stood up from the stool when he heard the words, and then shouted loudly, You better not think so. You stupid octopus. The faces of the people next to him had already collapsed, and Mrs. Hardy's heart was getting colder and colder. She felt that she was a little out of breath. You monster, short-lived blackmailer. You will definitely be imprisoned in a prison that will never see the light of day for the rest of your life to repent. James was not aware of his problem, and he was still madly outputting to Dr. Otto on the opposite side of the microphone, venting his anger. Dr. Octopus on the other side of the phone also turned pale. He gritted his teeth and said in a cold tone, Very good. How dare you talk to a great scientist in such a tone? Scientist? What kind of scientist are you? You coward who only knows how to kidnap and blackmail. Before Dr. Otto could finish speaking, James began to mock again. Mrs. Hardy covered her mouth with trembling hands. She was full of regrets now. If she had known what James was like, he might as well have called the police and waited for the police to come. Coward, how dare you call me a coward? The angry Dr. Otto directly smashed the computer in front of him, then grabbed the phone in his hand and said viciously, I want you to hand over the ransom to me alone. I hope you don't dare to come. What? James, who was outputting crazily, was a little dumbfounded when he heard this. That's right, it's just you, Dr. Otto continued. I will fax you the steps. I hope you don't dare to come. Otherwise, I can't guarantee what the consequences will be. After speaking, Dr. Otto hung up the phone directly, leaving only James holding the phone and saying a little at a loss, "He asked me to pay the ransom alone." The people next to him didn't say anything, they all looked at him in silence. Just now this guy said he was very calm. Mrs. Hardy also closed her eyes helplessly at this time and said tremblingly, "James, I will prepare the ransom. I hope you can bring Felicia back safely." Just as James was about to say something, a black figure suddenly appeared beside him and said in a cold voice, "You are responsible for the basket you poke. You go ahead with the ransom, and I will follow you. When I see that guy I'll get rid of him." Hearing the hoarse voice, James also turned his head to look. It turned out that Venom, whom he had scolded on TV before, was leaning against the table on the side and looking at him coldly. "Venom, what are you doing here, a violent murderer?" Well, before James could say anything more, Chen Linan came to him in an instant and pinched his mouth so that he could not speak. "Time is precious, don't talk nonsense. If you waste time like this, I don't mind letting you watch how I kill people." After speaking, Chen Linan waved his hand and threw James aside. He's really fed up with this old man, and he doesn't care what he says on the news, but today he didn't reach a negotiation with Dr. Octopus, and he's still talking, dawdling, and wasting time here, which makes him unable to endure. This old guy is really not afraid of death, or he has a bad head. I really want to open his head to see if it's a pig's brain. For James, who often slanders his reputation, Venom has no good feelings at all. James, who was thrown aside, felt very shameless. Just as he got up to say something, Mrs. Hardy next to him also said sharply, "Enough. Jonah, now is not the time to waste time. My daughter and you, all of my partners, are in the hands of that Dr. Octopus." At this moment, Spider-Man in a red and blue uniform also rolled in from the windowsill. He was also very surprised to see Venom here, but he didn't expect Venom to move faster than him. Seeing Spider-Man appearing here, the angry James also changed his target and yelled loudly, "Okay, you two are really together, you troublesome wall crawler came here, hurry up, come on, we don't need you here." Peter, who was suddenly scolded, was also furious. "What time is it now? Why can't this old guy stop?" Chirp, a jet black spider's thread directly sealed James's mouth. Chen Linan decided to use some special methods to force the old man to obey. He first sealed James's mouth with spider silk, and then tied him up. After finishing this, he turned his head to look at Mrs. Hardy and said, "Go and prepare the ransom as soon as possible, lady, you don't want to delay too long." Mrs. Hardy looked at James on the ground, and then at Chen Linan. In the end, she walked to the side and started calling to raise money without saying a word. Seeing Mrs. Hardy start to move, Chen Linan also raised James to his chest and said sharply to him, "Old man, I have told you many times, be obedient, follow the arrangement, don't shout like a shrew here, yell, my patience has a limit. I think you should also know my methods against those criminals. Do you want to experience it too? Anyway, I have killed so many people and you are not bad. Of course, you can also be very strong and refuse to listen to my threats, but I think there should be other family members in your family. If you don't want them to be hurt, just follow my advice and prepare the ransom, and then pay the ransom later." After saying that, he threw James to the ground, and then a tentacle extended from behind, cutting off the spider silk tied to his body. James cursed in a low voice as he got up from the ground, but he didn't dare to say anything more, and also went to the side to make a phone call to start raising money. He hated those two guys, but Robbie's safety was also important. "I'm sorry, in order not to let the police come over and disturb my plan, I would like to trouble you to wait here. After we set off, you can take care of yourself." Chen Linan scanned the crowd while hoarse. Said, "The name of Venom is still very intimidating." Hearing Chen Linan's words, these people also nodded obediently, and then found a place to sit down by themselves, not daring to do anything else. If the bosses like Tony Stark and Norman Osborn were there, things might be a little more troublesome, but those people basically left early after completing their communication, and their time is precious of. In the eyes of the rest of these people, Venom and Spider-Man are still different. Even Spider-Man will not kill criminals, but Venom is just the opposite. According to the news they heard, the criminals touched by Venom basically none survived. After arranging these people, Chen Linan walked to the sofa on one side and sat down. Seeing this, Peter also walked over and sat on the other side of the sofa. Although he didn't agree with the concept of venom against criminals, he was very happy to see James deflated. Finally, someone could cure that old guy. I didn't expect you to come here faster than me today. Thinking that the venom was already there when he came up just now, Peter also sighed. During this period of time, Venom usually solves some vicious crimes on the streets, but he didn't expect to encounter him in the kidnapping case today. Chen Linan didn't say anything when he heard this. He just shook his head and said, "This question is not important. Do you know anything about Dr. Octopus? After all, Spider-Man has been in New York City for several years, and he should know more of these weird people and things than Chen Linan." Hearing his question, Peter also sighed and said, "If there is no duplicate name, I think I should know him." He just remembered something about Dr. Otto when he heard someone in the crowd recognize Dr. Octopus as Dr. Otto. I didn't expect him to do such a thing as kidnapping. Then he talked about his intersection with Dr. Otto. He squeezed his chin and recalled, "When I was 10 years old, I participated in a science summer camp, and the teacher who led the team was Dr. Otto. I remember trying to do an experiment myself, failing for sure, and then my fellow students at summer camp with me kept making fun of me, which made me so frustrated that some of them didn't like science that much anymore. At that time, Dr. Otto said some unforgettable words. He said to me that these children's ridicule at me was meaningless. Science is a very important thing, and it is best proved by benefiting mankind. He also told me that if you want to study science, failure is an inevitable thing. In contrast, the failure of daring to try is much more powerful than stagnation." After Peter finished speaking, he also sighed. "I don't know what changed him. Is it because Mrs. Hardy stopped funding his scientific experiments?" Peter also knew that the Hardy Foundation funded Dr. Otto's experiment, but he did not expect that the subsequent development would turn out like this. He used to be so gentle and kind, but now he has become a criminal who kidnaps innocent people. After listening to Peter's words, Chen Linan also said in a deep voice, "No matter what he looked like before, he is just a criminal now. The most important thing now is to find him quickly and rescue the hostages." Peter nodded and said in a deep voice, "I understand that both Felicia and Robbie are innocent. No matter what reasons Dr. Otto has, he cannot support him in doing so." Then they didn't wait for a few minutes, and a piece of paper was spit out from the fax machine in the lobby, which stated the place and time to pay the ransom. James and Mrs. Hardy had also arranged the ransom at this time, and $1 million were placed in 2 suitcases. James picked up the paper, looked at it, and then said in a low voice, "I'm going to this place in half an hour, it seems that I have to go now." Chen Linan and Peter also came over at this time. Chen Linan looked at the box containing the money, and then took out 2 devices not much bigger than buttons from his waist and stuck them under the box. After it's glued on, its color will automatically blend in with the box. If you don't look closely, you won't be able to tell anything unusual. This is a locator created by him using the special characteristics of Venom spider silk and a little bit of technological power. Compared with ordinary pure technological products, this locator has better anti-interference ability and concealment ability. Peter on the side was also very surprised when he saw this locator. He knew that there was no such locator on the market, which meant that the locator was made by Venom himself. This level of scientific research is enough to show that Venom is not a locator, a reckless man who knows how to fight and kill. After finishing these things, James drove the car with the money and rushed towards the place where the ransom was paid. Peter and Chen Linan followed closely behind, following the vehicle and heading out of the city. After they left, Mrs. Hardy called the police and explained the situation to the police. The matter was too important and she had to make more preparations. In front of an abandoned factory building, James stopped the car. He lifted 2 large suitcases from the back seat, and walked into the abandoned factory building according to the steps faxed by Dr. Otto while observing the surroundings. After seeing this scene, Peter immediately set off and was about to enter the factory building, but Chen Linan next to him stretched out his hand to stop him. "Don't worry, I only felt 2 people including James, that cunning Dr. Octopus is not ready to be honest with someone." Watching Peter turn his head to look at him, Chen Linan also explained, "Just go out like this and get caught, it must have alerted him. Then what if he does something to James? Although Chen Linen's explanation was reasonable, Peter was still a little worried about James's safety. It's a fact that the old guy is annoying, but he can't do anything about it. Is it because of this that Venom is not ready to act? James seemed to have scolded him before. It has to be said that Peter's thinking is active, and in this moment he has been thinking about a lot of things. Chen Linan continued to speak softly. I'm just saying that we can't just rush in like you did just now, because it will be easy to be discovered. If we are discovered, the old man's safety will not be guaranteed. That Dr. Octopus will definitely think that he notified us, which will anger this psychopath. They haven't met yet. James is still waiting for Dr. Octopus. Let's try our best not to be discovered and touch him quietly, Chen Linan said while waving to Peter. Then the two slowly touched the top of the abandoned factory building, and they could just see what happened below from some gaps in the roof. In the factory building below, James, who was carrying a suitcase, was frowning and looking at the somewhat dim factory building. He shouted impatiently, "Is anyone there? Otto, come out. I'm already here. Where are you? Where's Miss Hardy? Where's Robbie?" James's voice echoed in the empty factory building. After a few seconds, a series of dull knocking sounds appeared from the factory building, and then they got closer and closer to him. Just when James squinted his eyes and tried hard to find the source of the sound from the dark warehouse, a thick and cold mechanical arm suddenly came from the darkness, and then wrapped him tightly and lifted him up. James was also a little scared to be lifted up like this, but when the mechanical arm grabbed him in front of Otto not far away, James, who had seen strong wind and waves, quickly calmed down. "I finally see you, Mr. President. It seems that you have indeed kept our agreement and came alone," Otto, wearing sunglasses, said with a smile. Although the sunglasses hid his eyes, his smile still expressed his affirmation of James's keeping his promise and his excitement for the ransom. "I've already communicated with the police. They won't get involved. The ransom is here, and the newspaper is being printed urgently," James said Dr. Otto's previous request. Then after finishing speaking, he continued to ask him, "Where are Miss Hardy and Robbie? Let me see them." "Sorry, I think I have told you once, you are not qualified to negotiate terms with the great Dr. Octopus." Dr. Octopus shook his head, and then ignored James's resistance and directly snatched the suitcase he was holding tightly in his hand with other mechanical arms. "What did you do to them? You also got the ransom, we've already discussed it before." Regarding Dr. Octopus's dishonesty, James also cursed angrily. Dr. Octopus directly covered James's mouth with the mechanical hand that was entangled with James, interrupting his breath, and then opened the two suitcases at hand, and checked that they were indeed filled with cash. "I will take you to meet them, but it will cost more to let you go," Dr. Octopus said to James, who couldn't speak, as he walked toward the depths of the warehouse, carrying two suitcases full of cash. "I now have another hostage, and your family and friends will need to pay more to ransom you. Don't worry, I'll call them again later. Mr. President should not be short of money, so the ransom is tentatively set at 1,000 million, how about it?" Dr. Octopus controlled the manipulator to shake James while talking. Seeing the anger on the other party's face, Dr. Octopus also laughed happily. Then they walked into the depths of the abandoned factory. Peter next to him also looked up at Chen Linan at this time. He remembered that Venom had put a locator in the box just now, and now is the time to use it. "Don't worry, their movements are all in my head." Chen Linan pointed to his head while talking. For the position feedback of the special locator, he can directly use the Venom to sense and locate. Hearing his words, Peter also scratched his head in confusion. He didn't quite understand what the other party meant. "Follow me." Before he could ask any more questions, Chen Linan waved to him and walked quietly in one direction. Seeing this, Peter suppressed the questions in his head and walked with Chen Linan. Starting from the abandoned factory, after walking for about 15 minutes, Dr. Octopus finally stopped. Chen Linan and Peter followed from a distance, watching him walk into a large factory with Ransom and James. This large factory is brightly lit and full of Dr. Octopus's experimental equipment. It is unknown how he got this factory into his own hands. Opposite the chaotic and orderly various experimental equipment, Felicia and Robbie were currently being firmly fixed by metal buckles to a wall several meters above the ground with only a protruding horizontal edge under their feet. After Dr. Octopus entered the factory, James was also placed next to them, and his hands and feet were firmly fixed with metal buckles. Okay, Mr. President, now I need to make another call to your family and friends to see if they are willing to exchange you back at some price. Dr. Octopus retracted his mechanical hand after fixing James, and then set his eyes on the phone in front of him. You stinky octopus that doesn't keep your word. We've clearly agreed. James cursed as he looked at Dr. Octopus below. Felicia next to her was also a little scared and puzzled and asked Dr. Octopus loudly, "Why did we do this? We didn't do anything to apologize to you." Dr. Octopus snorted coldly and said, "Keep your promise. Didn't you do anything wrong to me?" Of course you think so. Everyone will say that. No one has ever done anything to Dr. Octopus. But the truth. Dr. Octopus thumped the table fiercely and said, "My family looked down on me, and my classmates at school took pleasure in teasing me. Even if I got my doctorate before I was 20 years old, my colleagues still look down on me. They always laugh at me and laugh at my research and invention as having no future, but in fact they are the fools without brains. They don't know what kind of changes my invention will bring to human life once it is successful. They can't understand at all, and they will never understand how cold fusion can be produced in batteries. Then I found the Hardy Foundation to fund my experiment and they all said your mother was a great friend of science, even I thought so." Having said that, Dr. Octopus looked up at Felicia, with a sarcasm on his face, but in fact, she is just a profit-seeking businessman. I know that I will be able to control fusion energy in the end, but your mother doesn't think so. She thinks my progress in the experiment is still too slow, and finally cut off my funding supply. Without financial support, I can only move my laboratory and experimental equipment to a dilapidated basement, without even basic security. Science is rigorous. It is undoubtedly an extremely risky behavior to conduct experiments in a dilapidated basement. Accidents happen very quickly. After that accident, the cowardly Dr. Otto disappeared and was replaced by the revived Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus stroked the mechanical tentacles stretched out in front of him with a gentle and loving expression. These mechanical tentacles have kept me alive, and they have become a part of my body. Dr. Octopus flexibly manipulated the mechanical tentacles while looking at Felicia, who was fixed on the wall. Robbie and James said, "As for you three, your greatest value is to exchange enough ransom for me. You can also be considered as making your own contribution to Dr. Octopus's great experiment." Telling his own story made Dr. Octopus feel very comfortable. After he finished speaking, he ignored the struggling two people and picked up the phone on his own, planning to demand a ransom from James's family and friends. The greatest use of these people is to provide funds for his experiments. After the money from this extortion is used up, he will continue to use these special but extremely fast ways to raise money, including but not limited to kidnapping and extortion, robbing banks, and so on. Just as he was holding the phone and pressing the numbers one by one, a white spider web shot out from not far away and stuck firmly to his phone. "Hey, hands up, all hands." While talking, Peter pulled the phone out of Dr. Octopus's hand, and then quickly shot a few spider threads towards Dr. Octopus. Seeing Peter's sudden appearance, Dr. Octopus also seemed extremely angry. While pulling the spider silk sticking to his hand with his mechanical hand, he cursed at Peter, "Guy who is in the way. Get out of here." Wow, what a lot of strength. Under the joint dragging of several robotic hands, Peter was also pulled by the spider silk and flew towards Dr. Octopus. Bang! With the strength of Dr. Octopus's pull, Peter kicked Dr. Octopus directly, kicked him far away, and directly knocked over a workbench. Dr. Octopus stood up from the pile of overturned experimental equipment, looked at Peter fiercely and said, "Spider-Man, why are you meddling? Do you take meddling as your profession?" "Oh, it's just my hobby. After all, this kind of work has no salary and no vacation." Peter said witty words, while flexibly avoiding the tentacles of Dr. Octopus that kept attacking him. Seeing that Peter couldn't be caught just like this, Dr. Octopus also used his mechanical tentacles to pick up the overturned tables and chairs nearby, as well as the steel scrap not far away, and kept throwing them at Peter. "No matter how much you dodge, it's useless. The tentacles on my body are directly controlled by my thoughts, and they are even more flexible than my arms. You better be so sensitive all the time, or you will die when I find you." Looking at Spider-Man dodging in embarrassment under his attack, Dr. Octopus couldn't help but grin and said, "These tentacles are the strongest and most powerful weapons, just wait to be crushed by him." Having said so much, what do you do when you take a shower? Will these tentacles help you rub your back? Peter sneered at Dr. Octopus while ducking to the side, avoiding a large piece of rusty scrap iron. "I hope your skills can be as sharp as your mouth." Dr. Octopus had a dark face and concentrated his energy to speed up the attack speed of the mechanical tentacles. Oops! The sudden acceleration of the attack made it difficult for Peter, who was dodging continuously, to be smashed against the wall by a table, and then an arm was entangled by Dr. Octopus's mechanical arm. "Let's see where you go now, and wait to be torn to pieces by me." Dr. Octopus lifted Peter up from behind the table with his tentacles, and then prepared to grab his other hand and feet with other tentacles. If he was really entangled by him, then Peter would end up with a broken bone at the lightest, and if he planned for the worst, he would be torn into several pieces by these mechanical tentacles. Dr. Octopus seemed to have seen Spider-Man being torn apart by himself, with a cruel smile on his face. This is the benefit of having power. You can easily violate previous promises, just like your mother withdrew my funds, and you can also use it to destroy your enemies, just like Spider-Man who is about to be torn apart by me now, ha 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 ha. The arrogant words have been finished, but apart from Spider-Man who is struggling, the quiet factory makes Dr. Octopus feel a little bit wrong. When he turned around with Peter, whose arm was entangled, there was no one on the opposite wall where the hostages were imprisoned. The metal buckles that imprisoned Felicia and James were like plasticine in front of Chen Linan, and they were easily torn apart. Then when Peter attracted the attention of Dr. Octopus, Chen Linan had already rescued the 3 hostages, and their figures had just left the gate at this time. "Someone is coming with you. Cunning wall crawler." After realizing that he had been tricked, the furious Dr. Octopus vented all his anger on Peter. His other 3 tentacles quickly tried to grab other parts of Peter, but they were all nimbly dodged. Seeing such a situation, Dr. Octopus directly increased the strength of the only mechanical arm wrapped around Peter's left arm, so that Peter's arm made the sound of bone breaking. Although the situation was extremely critical, it was impossible for Peter to sit still. While enduring the severe pain in his left arm, he slammed his right hand on his left wrist, which was barely exposed under the entanglement of metal tentacles. Zzz. A burst of blue electric arc exploded from the spider silk launcher in Peter's left hand, and then passed along the metal arm of Dr. Octopus. Ah! The pain and numbness caused by the electric current directly hit Dr. Octopus's spine through the metal tentacles, causing him to let out a scream. This burst of electricity is a new function Peter added to his spider silk launcher after the last battle with the Green Goblin. What happened last time made him fully aware of the role that electric current can play in unexpected situations, so he quickly used this design on himself. Originally, this burst of electric current was not particularly strong, and at most it would make people feel a burst of numbness and not too severe pain. However, Dr. Octopus's mechanical tentacles are directly connected to the spine and controlled by nerves, so this burst of current is equivalent to directly acting on his spine and nerves, magnifying the pain and paralysis by more than several times. The paralysis and pain made Dr. Octopus's manipulator temporarily stagnant, and Peter took this opportunity to quickly free his arm from being entangled by the manipulator. At this time, his left arm could not use any strength at all, and the bones were broken into several pieces, hanging limply in front of his body. After getting out of trouble, he hurriedly opened a distance from Dr. Octopus to avoid being caught again. At this time, Chen Linan, who sent the hostages out of the factory, also returned to the factory. Looking at Peter's left arm with a broken bone, Chen Linan also raised his vigilance against Dr. Octopus a few points. His mechanical arm is very powerful, don't be caught or entangled by him. Seeing Chen Linan returning, Peter also told him as soon as possible what he had just done fighting with Dr. Octopus. Although it is difficult, bypassing those tentacles and attacking him directly should be the only effective method. Chen Linan also nodded when he heard the words, and then took out a small jar of ointment from his body and handed it to Peter. This is an ointment that can treat trauma. You first find a wooden board to fix your arm, and then apply it. It should pain relief. I know this thing, the trauma ointment industry, Peter said in surprise after taking the ointment. He didn't expect that Venom also used this. That's right. After speaking, Chen Linan stopped talking nonsense and rushed towards Dr. Octopus. Chen Linan quickly rushed in front of Dr. Octopus, raising his sharp claws to punch the black tiger out. But those metal tentacles seemed to be conscious, and quickly blocked Dr. Octopus's back, blocking Chen Linan's attack. The collision of the sharp claws and the metal tentacles made a tooth-piercing sound. Although Dr. Octopus hadn't recovered from the pain and paralysis, those tentacles blocked Chen Linan by themselves. Such a situation made him involuntarily think of the venom in his body. It seemed that these tentacles were not as simple as what Otto had just introduced. At this time, Otto also realized that someone was coming again. He turned around and looked at Chen Linan angrily, then gritted his teeth and roared, "You guys who are in the way should all deserve to die. All of you should deserve to die." With the roar of Dr. Octopus, the tentacles that blocked Chen Linan's attack also started to fight back. The grippers at the front of them unfolded and then spun quickly, like blooming flowers, but they were eager to be watered by blood. Buzzing, the front end of the tentacle spun and stabbed towards Chen Linan quickly, so fast that there was a sound of piercing through the air. Seeing this, Chen Linan also quickly waved his hands to resist the attack of the tentacles. For a while, the sound of jingling echoed continuously in the factory. "Are you the only one with tentacles? I have one too." Chen Linan cursed in his heart, and then 8 black tentacles stretched out from his back. These black tentacles completely blocked the attack of Dr. Octopus's manipulator, and the gap between the two sides was instantly bridged. There were even some black tentacles that had a bite in the collision with the mechanical tentacles and directly started to attack Dr. Octopus' body, but none of them could break through the metal armor on his body. Dr. Octopus felt a little uncomfortable after seeing Chen Linan extending his tentacles from behind. He did not expect such a change at all, because Chen Linan's clothes did not look particularly technological. No one can underestimate Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus yelled, and then increased his control over the mechanical tentacles, resisting the attacks of Chen Linan's black tentacles. "I'll see how long you can keep your mouth shut." Hearing his roar, Chen Linan also snorted and rushed towards Dr. Octopus. Without the advantages brought by the mechanical tentacles, Dr. Octopus himself is just an ordinary person protected by high-tech armor. Chen Linan's fingertips became sharper, with a metallic dark gold luster. When he rushed in front of Dr. Octopus, the other party could only raise his arms to block it. Stab, stab. Chen Linan's sharp claws left traces on Dr. Octopus's armor. The material of this armor was worse than the Green Goblin's armor he had encountered before, with both hardness and strength. Slightly less so. Dr. Octopus has lost the assistance of the mechanical tentacles at this moment, and his combat effectiveness has plummeted. His combat experience is much worse than that of Chen Linan, not to mention that he is still dual-purpose now. He is not like Chen Linan, who can cooperate with Venom. He has to control the metal tentacles to resist those black tentacles, and at the same time defend against the fierce attack in front of him. PFF'd. Chen Linan's sharp claws swiped across, and the sound this time was no longer the sound of metal clashing, but the muffled sound of flesh and blood being torn apart. Chen Linan's eyes became colder and colder. He looked at Dr. Octopus, who gritted his teeth and said with a sneer, "Your turtle shell has been broken." When he finished speaking, several more claw strikes flashed across Dr. Octopus' chest, and the delicate metal armor had been turned into tattered pieces, blood mixed with minced meat, splashing on the dusty floor due to the battle just now. Cough, cough. Dr. Octopus coughed. Blood slowly spilled from the corner of his mouth. The sunglasses on his face had been shattered into pieces, and his face turned pale due to blood loss. The situation in front of him made him feel desperate. He looked at Chen Linan's cold and narrow eyes, and clenched his teeth tightly. He quickly drew back the 2 mechanical tentacles that were wrestling with the black tentacles, and then quickly detonated them when they retracted to Chen Linan's side. Bang, bang. The explosion of the mechanical tentacles not only had a strong impact, but also countless metal fragments were ejected with the explosion, sinking into the surrounding facilities, equipment, and people with a strong impact. Although Chen Linan was caught off guard by the explosion, but fortunately there was a package of venom, those fragments did not harm his body, they were all accepted by the venom and thrown to the ground. Ba ba ba. Venom yelled angrily while throwing the metal fragments on the ground. "Why can't I tear it into pieces properly, and have to make some explosions? I'm really uncomfortable." In this sudden explosion, Chen Linan, who was the main target, was not injured, but Peter, who was watching the battle, was cut into the skin by the debris. Fortunately, he was still standing relatively far away, and it was just a scratch. The most serious injury was caused by the sudden explosion of Dr. Octopus. Not only did he lose 2 mechanical arms, but the fragments from the explosion pierced into the chest wound that Chen Linen had broken through, making him even more injured. Dr. Octopus, who had fallen by the wall, also fell into a frenzy when he saw this. He spitting blood, staggered to a console, smashed a tempered glass, pressed the button inside hard, and started the previously set self-destruct program. He originally designed this to clean up the scene after the kidnapping and extortion, but he didn't expect it to be used for him and his enemies to die together. Ahem, you hateful fools. Since you are so nosy, give me death. Come and bury the great Dr. Octopus. Ha 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 ha, cough cough. Dr. Octopus stared at Chen Linan and Peter viciously, then yelled loudly while vomiting blood. His eyes were bloodshot and almost overflowing with madness. At this moment, Chen Linan and Peter's brains were frantically warning that an unprecedented death threat was quickly approaching them. Run! Chen Linan and Peter shouted at each other at the same time, and then ran towards the exit of the factory. Peter was closer to the exit, so he ran faster, and quickly rushed out of the gate and ran into the distance. Because Chen Linan was closer to the inside, his speed was slower. Just a second or two after he ran out of the gate, huge flames instantly engulfed the factory. The roar of the explosion was deafening, and the huge impact made the trees not far from the factory stop at the waist break off. The burning factory brightened the dimly lit suburbs at this moment. Felicia, Robbie and James, who had already run away, also looked there worriedly after hearing the huge roar and the soaring flames. Know what's going on over there? Ahem. Chen Linan slowly stood up from the haystack, and Peter also slowly stood up holding a broken tree in the distance. Hiss. Today is really the most dangerous battle I have ever experienced. I almost thought I was going to die. Gasping for air because of the pain, Peter said with some emotion that he had never been so embarrassed fighting an enemy except for the last time he fought against the Green Goblin. Not only did he have a broken arm today, but he was also cut on his thigh and waist by metal fragments. The explosion just now made his skin burn. He bet that the back of his battle suit must have been burnt, and his skin might have been burned as well. Just as Peter took a deep breath to soothe the pain and complained, Chen Linen's face suddenly became serious, and he left the place immediately after telling Peter to take a good rest from a distance. Looking at Chen Linan, who left quickly, Peter couldn't help admiring the other party's still healthy body. The venom doesn't seem to have suffered any damage, it's really powerful. Maybe I should be a little more mysterious too, just to be cool. Chen Linan kept running in the suburbs, trying to stay as far away from Peter as possible. After about 2 minutes, he gradually stopped, and the camouflage on his body began to squirm rapidly, and soon all of them entered his body. At this moment, Chen Linan no longer had the disguise of Venom, but he was just wearing casual clothes. He left in such a hurry just now because Venom told him that his disguise might not be able to continue to be maintained. The flames and roar of the explosion had caused it a lot of damage, and it had to rest to recover. It's so uncomfortable, I feel like I should fall into a deep sleep right away. Venom moaned weakly. I already have a strong resistance to flames and sound waves, but the explosion made by the dead octopus is still a bit beyond my tolerance. This was the first time Chen Linan saw Venom so weak. He comforted him in a soft voice. Don't be angry, Otto has indeed turned into a dead octopus. Such a big explosion, if he is still alive, he will be killed. Let alone, I have to sleep. This time may not be very short, but it will not be very long. It is also my first time, and I have no experience. Venom continued to talk to Chen Linan, his voice getting smaller and smaller. Remember to eat more chocolate, so that I should recover faster. After the last sentence, Venom also fell silent. The sudden silence made Chen Linan feel nervous. Since the appearance of Venom, he seemed to have become accustomed to this hoarse and unpleasant voice talking to him all the time. Ha, it's still there. Chen Linan took a deep breath and comforted himself softly. Although the venom fell into a temporary slumber, he could still feel its presence. Now that things have come to this, he can only accept this fact. Calculating the time, it is estimated that Felicia and the others did not go far, and they should not be able to get a ride at this point. After looking at his current location, Chen Linan found the direction and started running quickly. Although Venom fell into a deep sleep, his physical fitness was still extraordinary and he ran quite fast. On the suburban road, Felicia and the others were walking slowly towards the city center. They should be fine, the explosion just now looks very powerful, Felicia said with some worry as she walked. Long-term walking and shoes that are not suitable for frequent walking have worn out her feet, so she walks with a limp. James looked at Felicia, and while slowing down his pace, he snorted softly and said, "Don't worry about that wall crawler. I know him better than you. His ability to save his life is as good as his annoyingness." "What about the other black gentleman? I seem to have seen reports about him on TV before," Felicia asked James softly, thinking about Chen Linan who had just sent them outside the factory. James also became a little serious when he heard the words and said, "That man is not like Spider-Man, he is a real criminal, a perverted killer." Robbie next to him shook his head helplessly after hearing what James said, and said, "Jonah, they just saved us. Although Spider-Man and Venom have different methods, they will never stand in the dark side." James shook his head and said, "Although he just saved us, I still want to remind you, if you see him, remember to hide away. Since he appeared, more than 20 people should have died by his hands. I'm not wrong, Robbie." James looked at Robbie and Felicia, who was obviously a little surprised, said seriously warned. He didn't have a good impression of these masked vigilantes. Even Spider-Man, who was called a good neighbor, was scolded bloody by him, let alone Venom, who could really kill people. Robbie nodded helplessly. Although he was on the side of Spider-Man and Venom, what James said was true. "I remembered. Some time ago, the newspapers were full of news about him. It is said that he would brutally kill criminals, and then leave his own sign to warn other criminals." After James's reminder and warning, Felicia finally remembered a report she had seen before. She usually doesn't pay much attention to the news, unless it's very popular. Even if she doesn't take the initiative to pay attention to the hot news, she will automatically gather in front of her eyes before she understands it. "That's right, it's him. Maybe you should subscribe to the Daily Bugle to keep an eye on the news, kid," James said helplessly after hearing the words. He didn't expect that such hot news would need to be recalled. Shouldn't it jump directly to his eyes when Venom is mentioned? James's words also made Felicia feel a little embarrassed. She really doesn't like newspapers and news very much. In fact, there is an important reason she didn't say it out. That is, she feels that the current media is too subjective and biased, making it impossible for people to see the objective facts clearly, and it will only lead you by the nose. There are many such media, and the most typical one is Mr. James's Daily Horn, because telling the truth will definitely make this gentleman unhappy, so Felicia wisely chose to remain silent. Just as they fell into silence again and walked forward with their heads sullen, a ray of light slowly came from a distance and stopped in front of them. In this dim environment, the sudden light was indeed a bit dazzling, and they all raised their hands, narrowed their eyes, and tried their best to let their eyes adapt to the light quickly. "Hello, can I trouble you to give us a ride?" Felicia squinted her eyes and shouted at the people in the car. Finally, there was a car coming here. Even if the other party might reject her, she didn't want to give up this opportunity. While they were standing by the side of the road waiting for an answer, a person got out of the car. He walked towards Felicia and said softly, "I'm here to pick you up." Hearing the familiar voice, Felicia also slowly removed the hand that was blocking her eyes, and Chen Linan's familiar face appeared in front of her. "Leon." After confirming that the person in front of him was Chen Linan, Felicia also threw herself into his arms. Woo! The appearance of Chen Linan finally gave Felicia a sense of reliance and security, and the fear and grievance suppressed in her heart also spewed out. She shed tears and sobbed involuntarily, and told Chen Linan about her fear and fear. Chen Linan's body was also a little stiff after being hugged. He wanted to say something, but when he saw Felicia sobbing, he finally swallowed his words, and then patted her on the back very unfamiliarly. Robbie and James next to them couldn't help raising their brows when they saw this situation, and showed the smiles of those who came here, which made Chen Linan feel even more embarrassed. The two of them tactfully opened the door and got in the car, leaving Chen Linan and Felicia outside. It took a while for Felicia's emotions to calm down, and she let go of Chen Linan with some embarrassment, thinking that she had been hugging him just now. Her face involuntarily became hot. Chen Linan also coughed a little awkwardly, then opened the car door for her and said, "Get in the car quickly, Auntie is very worried about you." Felicia hummed slightly when she heard this and got in the car. The vehicle turned around on the road and then drove quickly towards the city. In the woods in the distance, Peter was panting and running quickly. There are no tall buildings in the suburbs, so he can't fly with spider silk, and his arm is injured, so he can't run fast. He ran for a while and then rested against the tree for a while. Under the moonlight, his figure became farther and farther away. When Chen Linan sent Felicia and James home, the flames of the abandoned factory gradually died down. What was originally a huge factory is now only the scorched black steel frame standing on the ground, and everything else has turned into a piece of black ash. A large truck and several vans slowly approached from a distance and stopped beside the abandoned factory that had become ruins. A few heavily armed fighters got on and off the van, and they opened the door of the truck, revealing the waiting robot and several people in uniform. Immediately after the door opened, the robot's eyes sounded, and they jumped to the ground, with a different kind of light in their eyes, and they were constantly scanning the area. The people on the truck didn't get out of the truck, they just waited around a piece of equipment that looked like a mechanical bed and a life support cabin. Life found in vital monitoring scan. Vital signs are weak. While broadcasting mechanical voices, several robots surrounded a piece of ruins and lowered their heads. Then they began to clean up the ruins in front of them one by one. Broken stones and deformed steel were continuously lifted and thrown aside by them. After a few minutes, a bloody figure appeared in the ruins that had just been cleared out. His face was bloody, his hair was all burnt, mixed with his scalp, and it was hard to tell which part it belonged to. The two mechanical arms were like twists, completely enveloping the upper half of his body and part of the lower body. They were sizzling at the moment, obviously short-circuited under the high temperature and explosion. A scanner popped out from the arm of the robot, scanned the broken figure, and while reporting, he and other robots lifted the dying man out of the pit. Visual burns on the whole body were 50.00%, the scalp on the face was severely damaged, and the face was also damaged and burned. The calf is basically charred and the bones are broken and cannot be restored. Other bones in the area wrapped by the tentacles had fractures, but they were not completely broken. Although the skin was not directly burned by the explosion, it was stuck together when it came into contact with the mechanical tentacles at high temperature, and it needed to be peeled off manually. Vital signs are weak. It is recommended to treat as soon as possible. The probability of survival is 20.00%. After the robot was assembled and uploaded, the body was also carried onto the truck by them. The few people who were still on standby in the truck just started working immediately when they saw the broken body. The door of the truck compartment was gradually closed, and the security personnel next to them also cleaned up the traces of their coming here, and threw a burnt and bloody corpse into the ruins pit that had just been dug out by the robot. After all this was done, everyone returned to the van. The mission is complete, and the police can enter. In a van in the middle, a heavily armed man directed the convoy to leave as soon as possible, and said in a deep voice to the communicator on his wrist. "ZZ. Received. Evacuate as soon as possible." Following the response from the communicator, the convoy also slowly left the scene, leaving no trace as if it had never been there before. After a while, the howling siren came here with brilliant red and blue lights, and a large number of policemen began to investigate and report here. In New York City, in Jin Bin's secret laboratory, 2 life support chambers are placed in the middle, and Alistair is sitting on a suspension chair and observing the data on the computer beside him. "Arist, how's the progress?" Jin Bin's appearance suddenly popped out from the big screen. Alistair reported to Jin Bingwei while looking at the data. "Dr. Octopus's injuries have been brought under control, but his severed limbs cannot regenerate, but I can replace them with machines so that he can also become stronger. In addition, I also used a new drug to stimulate their bodies to improve their physical strength and various functions. They will usher in a new life and become the new Dr. Octopus and Tombstone." Alistair looked at the 2 people in the life support cabin with some excitement, with pride and anticipation that a new work was about to be born in his eyes. Jin also nodded in satisfaction when he heard Aristides' report and said, "Very well, they will become our new weapon, and I still have many plans to use them in the future. By the way, remember to leave some means of control. We have to be fully prepared. I don't like the feeling that things are out of control, you understand." Hearing Jin Bin's reminder, Alistair also nodded and said, "Understood, I will implant remote-controlled explosive devices in the back of their necks, so that they cannot resist our orders." "That's right, I'm looking forward to their completion more and more." Jin Bing also smiled when he heard the words, "I will come back to see it in a few days." After listening to Alistair's report, Jin Bing also closed the computer in front of him and sat back in the chair. The successive appearance of Spider-Man, Venom, and Green Devil made him feel a very urgent sense of crisis. Although he has a lot of armed forces to protect his own safety, the appearance of these supercriminals and Venom broke his sense of security. Especially the Green Goblin's previous attack, where if it wasn't for Spider-Man's sudden appearance, he almost lost his life there. Although he wished to tear the Green Goblin into pieces, after realizing that his power could not deal with him now, he simply showed weakness to Norman Osborn. Not only did he no longer mention the loan from the other party and the inventions he had requested before, but he even had further cooperation with Norman Osborn. This is also the reason why he had no follow-up after attacking Venom once, because he suddenly found that he had already established a lot of difficult enemies, and this situation was not what he wanted. To be able to achieve this position step by step, and to make the name of Jin Bing a legend, Wilson Fisk certainly did not rely on brainless development. He is very good at judging the situation, knowing that those people want to kill the grass and roots immediately, and those people can't solve it immediately, or they need to change the method and angle to boil the frogs in warm water. For Venom, the strategy he is adopting now is not to provoke, because the other party has not discovered his existence yet, so he can temporarily hide it. As for the Green Goblin, he wished he could crush the opponent into pieces, but this person was elusive and only listened to Norman Osborn's orders. On the one hand, he didn't have enough strength to deal with the opponent, and on the other hand, he couldn't contact the opponent to instigate him. So in desperation, he could only swallow the anger in his heart, put on a smiling face and cooperate with Norman Osborn in order to paralyze the opponent. Although he can no longer use debts to directly force Norman Osborn, he can still secretly infiltrate other shareholders of the Osborn Group, or force or lure them, in order to achieve the purpose of secretly controlling the Osborn Group. At that time, no matter how unwilling Norman Osborn was, he would have no choice but to know that it was Jin who was manipulating it behind the scenes, because he had already been kicked out at that time. How can a person who has no chips in his hand get on the gambling table? Thinking of this, Jin couldn't help but sneer. When the transformation of Dr. Octopus and the Tombstone is completed, he must crush all those jumping clowns. Whether it's Spider-Man, the Green Goblin, or Venom, none of them can escape. Although Venom doesn't have much intersection with King, his aversion and hatred for Venom is even stronger than Spider-Man. Although Spider-Man is in the way, at most he will put some of his minions in jail. Sometimes a stroke of luck may ruin some of his deals, but this is not a big deal, and the loss is not too big. Although Venom had little contact with him, he directly killed his drug manager in New York, causing him heavy losses. Originally, the competition for the big cake in New York was fierce. Silverman, another underworld leader, tried to reach out to New York many times but was beaten back. As a result, John Harmon's sudden death led to the disconnection of drug lines in New York. By the time Jin Bin realized it, his power in the entire market had been washed away into a mess. Although he acted immediately to recover some losses, but there is still no way to return to the time when he dominated the drug market. How could the bones that had been eaten be spit out so easily? Jin Bin's thoughts kept circling, from the enemy to his business, and then to the current situation and the secret weapon he was preparing. Chapter 91. Time flies by so peacefully, autumn has passed in the blink of an eye, and the new year is about to usher in. At the end of 2009, Chen Linan lived a relatively leisurely life. During this period of time, New York City seemed very peaceful. There were no strange people suddenly appearing, and even some vicious crimes were much less than before. However, although there are fewer, it is not completely absent. As long as there are human beings, some vicious cases will never disappear, because not everyone can control the evil thoughts in their hearts. On the side of the street in the evening, At the gate of a large bank, a dozen police cars were parked outside in a semicircle at this moment. The policemen in the cars were wearing thick autumn and winter uniforms, looking at the closed bank with serious expressions. Those inside, you are surrounded. Putting down your weapons and surrendering as soon as possible is your only option. A bearded police officer was holding a loudspeaker and speaking loudly to the gangsters who robbed the bank and took many hostages inside. Maybe it was because the weather was too cold, maybe it was because the voice was too loud. The beard on the bearded police officer's lips was trembling all the time, and the tiny snowflakes were breathed into water droplets as soon as they fell on it, and then fell to the ground along the beard. Your 10-minute preparation time. We need 2 cars to leave here, and I will kill a hostage in 1 minute overtime. A burly man with a black hood and a very rough voice shouted to the police outside. My patience has a limit. If you don't care about the lives of the hostages, then of course I don't care either. The countdown starts now. Hearing the rampant remarks of the robbers inside, the bearded police officer also hammered the roof of the car angrily to vent his anger. After hammering, he turned to the policeman next to him and said, "Go prepare 2 cars, and remember to install the most concealed positioning device on me." The policeman next to him nodded when he heard the words, and then went back to make arrangements. The bearded policeman picked up the walkie-talkie in his hand after ordering the car, and said anxiously, "Have the special forces come? Where's the sniper?" "The special forces are coming soon, and the snipers are looking for the commanding heights." A noisy voice came from the walkie-talkie, replying to the words of the bearded police officer. "These robbers who deserve to go to hell." The bearded police officer cursed angrily. He cleared up the relationship for a long time a while ago, and finally got a response that he could continue to climb a step. Who knew that this kind of thing happened today? If he can't handle it well, he won't even talk about climbing up a step, and he won't even talk about whether he can keep his current position. The sound of the helicopter overhead was slowly approaching. The bearded police officer looked up and saw that the logos of different media were printed on the helicopters, especially James's J3 Media was the most conspicuous. Looking at the helicopter circling like a fly above, the bearded police officer felt even worse. Now every step he made would be magnified to the eyes of the whole New York and even the citizens of the whole country. The bearded police officer, who was getting more and more irritable, kept pacing and cursing, without a specific subject, and he didn't know who he was scolding. On the building not far from the bank, Spider-Man Peter Parker was standing on the roof and looking down. He should have jumped down and sneaked into the bank immediately, and then fought the gangsters inside. But at this moment, some strange changes had taken place in his body, and these changes made it impossible for him to jump downstairs without hesitation like before. "It's too bad. My spider ability has disappeared again." Peter put his hand on the fence on the roof to feel whether there is the same sense of absorption as before, while thinking extremely depressed and anxious in his heart. When he jumped from the top of the opposite building just now, his spider ability suddenly disappeared again. If he hadn't reacted quickly and shot out the spider silk to climb up in time, he might have fallen directly from the upstairs. The force of pulling the spider silk just now made his arm feel a pain, and the disappearance of the spider's ability made his physical fitness no longer what it was before. You must know that it is impossible to fly with the strength of ordinary people, because the effect of gravity and the upward pull of the spider silk will instantly break his arm when he falls. Peter didn't know what happened to him recently. His spider ability suddenly started to come and go. At first, he thought it was because he was too tired and didn't have a good rest. For this reason, he also gave him a full day of rest. He really felt good after the first rest, but soon his body lost his ability again. What should I do? There are so many thugs with guns that I can't solve in my current state. Looking at the situation below and the time slowly passing by, Peter felt extremely anxious. Whether he gets hurt is secondary. What he worries about is that if the robbers are not completely dealt with, what will happen if these angry desperados kill the hostages indiscriminately? Just when Peter gritted his teeth and made up his mind to give it a go, he saw a black figure suddenly appearing on the street outside the bank. Chen Linan was standing on the street next to the bank at the moment, because he was standing relatively concealed, and now everyone's attention was on the bank and the robbers, so not many people saw him. When Peter saw Chen Linan also saw him. Although he was puzzled as to why Peter stood still on it, Chen Linan didn't hesitate, and kept thinking about how to deal with the robbers inside without hurting the hostages. After thinking for a while and having a plan in mind, Chen Linan immediately walked aside and found an entry point from the bank plan and detailed information sent from his secret laboratory computer. While Venom was sleeping, not only did his combat skills improve rapidly, but he also used his own laboratory and whimsy to add many small designs that are convenient for combat. Accessing the database of the secret laboratory is one of them. Chen Linan found the back door of the bank from the map, and then sneaked in quietly from there. Next to the small door on the side of the bank, a robber wearing a black hood was standing guard here with a gun. His task was to keep an eye on the small door and immediately notify the accomplices inside if something unexpected happened. Just as he was slowly pacing aside in front of the door, and then turned around to continue the process, a sharp blade suddenly pierced through the door, and then went straight into his throat. A lot of black blood gushed out of the robber's mouth as the blade pierced it. The blood was blocked by the hood, and then slowly seeped in without spraying a single drop. Without a sound, a robber was quietly killed. After the robber died, the small door he was guarding slowly opened. Chen Linan entered sideways from the outside. Then, while retracting the short knife stuck in the door, he slowly placed the robber's body on the ground. At first, Chen Linan used a long straight knife, but later in the battle he found that the long straight knife was too long, and the small time when it was unsheathed would affect his fighting rhythm, so he replaced the knife with a blade length of 45 centimeters. Dagger. After switching to a short sword, Chen Linan's fighting became much smoother. In addition, he would sometimes smear blood-sealing poison on it, which would greatly improve the smoothness with which he could deal with his opponents. After Chen Linan placed the robber's body, he continued to grope in silently. Before reaching the lobby where the robbers gathered, he dealt with 2 guards, also without making a sound. There are still 3 kidnappers. Taking into account their scattered positions and the impact of the hostages, the remaining minutes should be able to solve the problem. Chen Linan stood in the aisle not far from the hall. Through the infrared structural perspective and thermal imaging technology on his eyes, he could see the positions of people outside. The Venom is sleeping, and he can't perceive it directly like before, otherwise it wouldn't be so troublesome. After all, the perception of Venom is convenient and clear. Thinking of this, Chen Linan also missed Venom a little. Although that guy had a hard time singing and speaking, he was still a bit uncomfortable now that he couldn't hear it. Withdrawing his divergent thoughts, Chen Linan also took a deep breath, adjusted his state and prepared to attack. He first took out 2 smoke bombs, then pulled them apart and slowly threw them out. He had just borrowed them from the police outside. After all, it happened suddenly, and he couldn't make enough preparations. If he can make good preparations, he can directly prepare 2 drugs from the laboratory, so there is no need for such trouble now. Unfortunately, imagination is imagination after all, and reality still has to be faced. Thick white smoke soon filled the air, filling the entire space, and the kidnappers inside were not fools. They realized something was wrong the first time the smoke bomb rolled in. Just as one of the kidnappers was subconsciously grabbing towards the place where the hostages were squatting, a knife flashed from the side instantly, cutting off his outstretched arm at the root. The toxin spread rapidly from the wound, and within 2 seconds the kidnapper was foaming at the mouth. The blood vessels on his face were quickly dyed black, his whole body twitched and lost his breath. At the same time that the kidnapper was dealt with, Chen Linan also pushed several large counters in front of the hostages to help them block the stray bullets for a while. Almost at the same time, dense gunshots rang out. Although they were all invisible in the dense fog, it was correct to shoot at the place where the hostages were, because no matter who came, his purpose must be to rescue the hostages. The bullets crackled and hit the thick counter, and the hostages behind were all trembling with fear. If it weren't for the cloth strips on their mouths that prevented them from making a sound, their cries would definitely ring out one after another at this time. Chen Linan jumped to the ceiling and clung to the ceiling as soon as the bullets hit. Looking at the robbers who were firing violently below, he also pulled out his pistol and called these people by name. Bang, 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 bang. The bullets shot out from the pistol in Chen Linan's hand, and rushed into the heads of the robbers below with each shot. The bullet passed through these people's heads obliquely from above, and the huge impact force made the bullet pass through their heads and took away the back of their heads. All of a sudden, red blood and white brains splashed all over the ground. These robbers were not fools. After realizing that the situation was not good, they hurriedly found their own bunkers and hid their bodies behind. The burly man who was the leader of the robbers also realized how tricky things were at this time. He knew that the police would not dare to take such a risk to break in directly, so the person who came now was either Spider-Man or that Venom. I have never heard of Spider-Man killing people directly, so the current opponent can only be Venom. The burly robber has done enough homework before doing this ticket, and also preset the surprise attack of Spider-Man or Venom. The best situation is that before these two people arrived, he had already taken the banknotes and his accomplices and ran away in the car provided by the police. He knew that the police would definitely do something wrong, so he made corresponding arrangements for it. The worst-case scenario is that they rush over within 10 minutes to meddle in their own business. The plan of the burly robbers is to use hostage threats and heavy firepower to suppress them. The burly robber didn't think how powerful these two masked guys were. After all, in his perception, no matter how powerful they were just one person. He didn't believe that he and his accomplices had nearly 20 people and had enough firepower to deal with them. Legends of these disasters are always exaggerated to those who haven't faced the storm, and that's obviously how the burly robber understood Spider-Man and Venom. But soon he really realized the difference between these two people and them, and he recognized himself before he died. Seeing that the effect of the bullet had reached its maximum, Chen Linan also put back his pistol, then drew out his short knife, and quietly climbed from the ceiling to the head of a robber. The bright knife light flickered again, and Chen Linan stood upside down and inserted the two short blades through the kidnapper's eyes, and then quickly retracted them. Amid the brief screams and gunshots that immediately followed, Chen Linan's figure disappeared like a ghost again, blending into the thick gray-white smoke. The lobby of the bank was extremely quiet at this moment, only the robbers were breathing deeply and nervously. They held a pistol in one hand and a dagger or short knife in the other, leaning on the bunker and constantly looking around to be on guard. Suddenly, a black figure appeared in front of a robber. Seeing this, the robber immediately pulled the trigger towards this figure. But Chen Linan moved quickly with his super reflexes, and before the second bullet was fired, he had already slashed the knife across the robber's neck. Blood gushed out from the severed neck artery like a fountain, and as the corpse fell, a large area was dyed red. "Come to my side. Let's get together," the leading burly robber shouted in a low voice. He realized that the dispersal would only be dealt with by Venom one by one, so they had to get together. Hearing the leader's voice, the remaining 8 robbers also quickly gathered towards him. In the process, Chen Linan took the opportunity to wipe the necks of 2 more robbers. So when the remaining robbers gathered around the burly robber, there were only 7 people left including him. Venom. The burly robber gritted his teeth and cursed secretly. It has only been 2 minutes since the smoke bomb appeared, and 12 of his accomplices have died. He and the few people who were sent out to guard the gate were also counted among them. Under such circumstances, someone sneaked in, and he knew their fate with his knees. "Boss, what should we do now?" a robber asked with a trembling voice. He didn't expect how the promise of making a fortune would suddenly turn into what it is now. "You are in a group of 4, and we are in a group of 3. Guard your surroundings and the top of your head, and walk slowly from here to there," the burly robber arranged in a deep voice. "It won't be long before the smoke bomb dissipates. As long as he lasts for a while, he won't be able to take advantage of his field of vision. Let's see where he will go." Not far away, Chen Linan was leaning against a pillar. Hearing the robber's analysis and arrangements, he nodded in agreement. This person's analysis was correct. The reason why he was able to kill more than a dozen people by himself was because of the cover effect brought by the smoke bombs, because it was beneficial for him to defeat them one by one. At this time, the thick gray smoke has faded a lot. Chen Linan must seize the time to deal with the remaining people quickly, otherwise after the smoke dissipates, they can see themselves as long as they shoot violently with their guns. Give him a lot of trouble. It's useless to know that holding a group is useless. After all, I can also use guns. Times have changed, and I don't have any strange habit of resolutely not using hot weapons. Chen Linan looked at the rifle that fell next to him, and the corners of his mouth under the mask slightly curled up. A few seconds later, the remaining 7 robbers were moving slowly in formations of 3 and 4. Suddenly there was a surge of gunfire, and a barrage of bullets struck from the side, and the unprepared robbers were immediately knocked down to the ground. The burly robber and the robber standing behind were fortunately blocked by the bullets by their companions, and temporarily escaped the fate of being knocked down. Just as they staggered to find cover and were about to shoot back, the gunfire that was still going on just now suddenly stopped, and a black figure rushed in front of them. The bright knife light streaked across the air, like a crescent moon, and a robber was cut in half with the gun and palm in his hand. He screamed terribly, then began to foam at the mouth, fell to the ground and lost his breath. The burly robber roared, venting his anger at Chen Linan in front of him with his gun. Chen Linan stepped on the ground hard, jumped up from the ground very lightly, and then fell behind the robber. While he was flipping forward, his blade also cut across the neck of another robber, sending the robber and his companion to hell one after another. In an instant, only the burly leader was left among the robbers in the venue. The muzzle of his gun was lifted up with Chen Linan's figure, but the bullets were always one step slower, and none of them caused the slightest damage to the enemy. After Chen Linan landed, the leader also roared and rushed up. Even if he died, he would bring this nasty guy with him. Seeing the burly robber rushing up, Chen Linan also threw the short knives on the ground, letting them plunge straight into the ground. Then he stepped on the spot, bent his elbows facing the robber, and hit the opponent's chest with his elbow straight before the opponent's fist waved to his face. Crack, accompanied by the crisp sound of bones breaking, the robber was thrown out of the sky, and then slammed into the wall of the bank lobby. When the robber's breathless body began to fall with inertia, two bright cold lights howled, passed through the two arms of the corpse, and nailed it to the wall like two nails. Chen Linan looked around the hall, and after confirming that all the robbers present had been dealt with, he picked up the feet of a robber whose neck had been cut off, and used the remaining blood of the other party to draw a picture next to the crucified robber. Put on a Venom logo. Ha, let's call it a day. Chen Linan clapped his hands, kicked open the large counter in front of the hostages, brought out the trembling hostages behind, and untied the ropes that tied them. It's safe now, you can go out, Chen Linan said without any ups and downs, and then turned and left the hall without waiting for any response from the hostages. The hostages looked at Chen Linan, who had already left, and looked at each other, not knowing what to say. They seemed to have not understood what happened after the disaster. When the fog gradually dissipated and the corpses on the ground gradually became clear, the hostages screamed and rushed out from the bank's gate. The sudden appearance of hostages startled the bearded police officer outside. He thought the kidnappers were crazy and was about to come out and fight them. Of course he also heard the gunshots and flames inside just now, but he didn't dare to rush in without knowing what was going on. He also shouted into the inside with a loudspeaker, and used the vehicle to be ready immediately to appease the robbers, but the other party did not respond to him. Seeing that all the hostages had escaped, the bearded police officer slowly approached the bank with a team of special police officers. Without being able to confirm that the danger had been lifted, he didn't dare to rush in rashly, lest he fall into some unknown ambush or trap. After the pathfinders in front indicated that there was no problem, the bearded man also led the rest of the people into the bank. The moment he pushed open the door, the scene that directly broke into his eyes made his eyes widen and goosebumps all over his body. In the bank, there was only a faint amount of gray smoke left, and there were many corpses lying here and there in the hall, with blood and brains all over the smooth tiles. On the side wall, a robber wearing a black hood was nailed to the wall. His head was drooping, his arms on either side were raised at a slant, pierced by two knives whose blades had sunk into the wall. Next to his corpse, a black and red Venom logo was drawn beside it. The big split mouth and upturned eyes seemed to be endowed with a soul in such a scene, which looked particularly terrifying and creepy. On the top of the building near the bank, looking at the hostages rushing out of the bank above, Peter's heart was finally relieved. Fortunately, there is Venom, Peter thought to himself with a long breath. If he failed to rescue the hostages due to his sudden change, and if something happened to those people, he would never forgive himself for the rest of his life. What happened? It's not your character to watch the battle upstairs. Chen Linan suddenly appeared on the guardrail on the other side of the roof of the building. He looked at the somewhat dejected Peter. His voice was as smooth and hoarse as ever, without any fluctuations. Looking at Chen Linan, who was walking slowly, Peter smiled wryly and said, "I was planning to go down, but something happened suddenly. If I hadn't reacted quickly, you might see me falling into mud now. Spider-Man will fall to his death. If such a thing really happens, even that old fellow James will have to doubt its authenticity." Hearing Peter's self-mockery, Chen Linan also said softly with a slightly undulating voice. "The possibility that Spider-Man will fall to his death is the same as that a fish will drown in the water." Chen Linan really can't think of any kind of accident that would cause Peter to say this. Is the silk shooter suddenly broken? But even if the spider silk launcher is broken, as long as he touches an object, his bioelectric absorption will not make him lose his strength and fall to his death. Like the previous battle with the evil spirit, it was really difficult to focus on falling directly from the aircraft because of the special circumstances, but even then Peter didn't suffer too much damage. "It's true, my spider ability suddenly disappeared, and I returned to the state of an ordinary person. When the ability disappeared just now, I was on the wall of the building. If it wasn't for the spider silk launcher, I would have fallen to my death," Peter said in a deep voice. His voice was full of distress and irritability. "The originally normal spider silk flying is completely impossible for me now that my ability has disappeared. My arm was almost pulled off just now, and it is still hurting now." As Peter spoke, he turned his left arm, and it could be seen from the unconcealed gasp that he really felt bad. Peter's statement made Chen Linan realize the seriousness of the matter. If he did not understand the reason why this ability suddenly disappeared, Peter, who continued to be Spider-Man, might die at any time. "Maybe you should rest for a while," Chen Linan said his suggestion in a deep voice. "If you don't do this, your life as Spider-Man will be in danger at any time." Peter also lowered his head when he heard the words. He knew that Venom was right. This time he reacted in time, so he didn't fall to the ground. But if he faces a robber with a gun next time, can he dodge the bullet as easily as he does now without the spider sense? Even if he doesn't meet a robber with a gun, just a knife or an accidental fall from upstairs is enough for him to drink a pot. "Oh, you were right, I really need to study the changes in my body." Peter sighed and said softly. If this situation is not solved, he may have to retire early. Venom is worried about his own safety as Spider-Man continues to fight crime, but Peter actually has deeper worries besides this. He was still afraid that he would turn into some terrible monster. During this time, not only his spider ability would suddenly disappear, but also his ribs and heart on both sides often felt uncomfortable. This situation made him worry from time to time whether he would turn into a humanoid spider and grow a few more arms. If such a situation would really happen, it would be harder for Peter to accept than turning back to an ordinary person. He didn't want to hurt Aunt May and the neighbors around him, and he didn't want to turn into a monster and cause irreparable harm to the citizens of New York. Thinking of this, Peter turned to Chen Linan and said seriously, if I turn into some kind of monster in the future, please do not hesitate to get rid of me. I will try my best to notify you in time when I feel something is wrong. By the way, is there any way I can contact you?" Chen Linan was also a little dazed after hearing Peter's advice to him, and realized that Peter was really worried about this issue. If Venom were still awake, he would definitely call him a fool. Chen Linan thought to himself. He was silent for a moment, and then took out a small device from the hidden tool bag on his waist. It was similar in shape to a watch, but thinner and lighter. There is only one screen on the square dial, and the strap can also be removed to put it directly in the tool bag. This is a communicator to contact me. Its function is to send me emergency signals and edit text messages. Although the function is simple, it is very confidential and safe. Chen Linan handed the things to Peter and explained the functions to him. If the situation is very urgent, it will activate the positioning function when sending the signal, but you can choose the switch yourself, and the positioning will not be activated under normal circumstances. Peter took the communicator and listened to Chen Linan's explanation of it. He also looked up at Chen Linan, and then said softly and firmly, "I believe you." Hearing Peter's words, Chen Linan also had a smile on his lips, but when responding to his words, Chen Linan still said in a calm voice, "Thank you for your trust, so if that happens, I will act faster." "Ha ha ha, then I'm relieved." Peter laughed loudly. After hearing Chen Linan's promise, he also had some confidence in his heart. In this way, if the worst happens, he doesn't have to worry about hurting others. The venom is so powerful, it will definitely get rid of him quickly. Hearing Peter's relieved laughter, Chen Linan didn't say anything. He turned around and walked to the edge of the roof, then looked back at Peter and paused before jumping off and said, "Before the worst happens, you still have the opportunity to find a solution to the problem. Don't give up hope easily. If you die, it will be a headache for one person to maintain the law and order of the entire city. Don't cause me such trouble." Before Peter could reply, Chen Linan, who had finished speaking, jumped off the roof of the building. Peter was also taken aback when he heard the words, and then chuckled and murmured, "If I die, the criminals should be the ones who have a headache." Venom's concern is really special, but from this point of view, he is not as cold as he appears. It's so mysterious. Peter looked at the building in the distance and sighed. After sighing, he scratched his head and said, "But isn't it cool to have a mysterious guy as a friend?" After speaking, Peter also turned and walked towards the elevator of the building. He shook his head and murmured as he walked, "I should have let him take me down with me just now, but now I'm going to squeeze the elevator again. I may be the worst superhero in the world." In New York City, in Kim Bin's secret laboratory. The burly Jin Bing was looking eagerly at the secret laboratory behind the glass. Beside him, Alistair, who was sitting on a suspension chair, was methodically pressing the operation buttons and joysticks in front of him, controlling many mechanical arms in the laboratory remotely. In the laboratory, Dr. Octopus and Tombstone are hanging in the center, and the mechanical arms controlled by Alistair are completing the last work on them. These arms are mainly concentrated on Dr. Octopus, because his body is severely damaged and there are many places that need to be repaired and strengthened. Dr. Octopus was completely naked, and his two legs started at the joint where the thigh connected to the calf, and they had completely turned into mechanical legs shining with metallic luster. His badly damaged scalp has grown back with thinning hair, and the upper left of his cheek has been replaced with metal, as the left eye and skin were completely destroyed by flame burns. The discarded left eye in the middle of the metal has been replaced by a mechanical eyeball, and it is flashing red light at this moment, trembling and shrinking unconsciously, undergoing final adjustments. Unlike the transformation of Dr. Octopus, the Tombstone next to him did not have any organs or body parts replaced with machinery. Alistair just injected him with an improved and strengthened experimental medicine. This medicine will damage the various organs of the Tombstone's body and shorten their lifespan, but at the same time, it will also strengthen the mutation of the Tombstone itself in all aspects. The color of his body has changed from the original stone-like gray to a deeper and richer gray, and the muscle lines and tissues of the whole person have become stronger, visible to the naked eye. Now when injecting nutrient solution and some reagents into the strengthened Tombstone, Alistair needs to use a diamond-polished drill bit coupled with high-speed rotation. Moreover, after the injection is completed, the small wound caused by the diamond drill bit will completely disappear within a few minutes, and it will return to its original state. This change fully demonstrates how huge the change of the Tombstone is. It's really an exquisite work, Alistair, you really didn't disappoint me. Jin Bin looked at the two newborn bodies inside, and praised Alistair with a smile on his face. Such a result is enough to show that the money he invested has maximized value, and Alistair has perfectly transformed these two people. The powerful humanoid weapon was finally formed, and he could finally carry out his own plan. Thinking of this, the smile on Jin Bing's face became even brighter, as if he had seen the enemies he had been thinking about die tragically in front of him. Aristo also raised the corner of his mouth when he heard the words, and continued to introduce the details of the two inside to Jin proudly. I used a new type of potion specially suitable for him on the Tombstone. Although these medicines overdraw his vitality and squeeze part of his body functions, they also make the Tombstone stronger. He'll have greater strength, greater speed, skin harder than stone, and healing powers like never before. After talking about the Tombstone, Alistair pointed to Dr. Octopus and continued, the transformation of Dr. Octopus is much more complicated than that of the Tombstone. After all, he is not a mutant like the Tombstone. I first repaired his crippled legs and damaged left eye mechanically, so that he can stand up again and have a mechanical prosthetic eye with multiple functions. Then I carried out segmented mechanical reinforcement to his whole body's bones, and carried out internal transformation to the maximum that his body can accept, as if his whole body bones were welded with metal armor. This transformation not only solves the problem that the prosthesis is too heavy to move, but also allows his body to be mechanically strengthened differently from the tombstone, which greatly improves his physical qualities. I also restored his tentacles, and strengthened and improved their materials. I even improved the connection between him and the tentacles. Now he can command these little guys faster and faster. Alistair became more and more excited as he talked. He was really satisfied with these two works, and even provided him with a lot of inspiration for making Spider Killer to a certain extent. After listening to Alistair's explanation, Jin Bing's eyes became more greedy and hot. His money was indeed not in vain. With these two big killers, his plan can start. Very good, very good. Jin looked at Alistair and praised. I will provide you with more funds, and you can use this money to continue your research. Really, thank you for your generosity, Mr. Kingpin. Alistair became excited when he heard this. For a scientist, sufficient funds means that he can do research without restraint and give full play to his talents. Realize your own ideas. Looking at the excited Alistair, Jin Bin also squinted his eyes and smiled. In his opinion, Alistair is simply too simple and easy to use. He just took advantage of his father's death and his hatred of Spider-Man before, and this genius scientist became his subordinate willingly. Now he only needs to spend some money to obtain Alistair's future technology and research results, and also increase the other party's gratitude and loyalty to him. He likes doing this kind of profitable business the most. By the way, did you do what I told you to stay behind? Jin asked Alistair. He didn't want these two powerful weapons to be out of his control. Of course, I have implanted chip bombs in the back of their necks. If they dare to resist orders, they only need to press a button to blow off their necks. Alistair handed a small device to Jin Bin while talking. This device is boxy and has only 2 red buttons on it. As you can see from the small characters below, these 2 buttons belong to Dr. Octopus and Tombstone respectively. There is also a protective case on the outside of the device, in order to prevent some collisions or accidental touches. This device is the only one, and now the lives of both of them are in your hands. Alistair looked at Jin Bin, who took over the device, and explained to him. Hearing that Alistair said that this was the only button, the strangeness in Jin Bin's eyes also dissipated. He put the device in his pocket, and then commanded Alistair with some expectation. Let them wake up now, I believe the 2 of them have been waiting for a long time. Alistair nodded when he heard the words, and then operated the mechanical arm in the laboratory to inject a dose of medicine into Tombstone and Dr. Octopus respectively. As the medicine slowly entered their bodies, Dr. Octopus and Tombstone also opened their eyes one after another. Whereas here, Dr. Octopus opened his eyes, the white ceiling and the harsh lights made his eyeballs feel a little stinging, and he had to blink to adapt to the bright environment. Just after Dr. Octopus blinked his eyes a few times, he suddenly and keenly discovered how he could still see things with his eyes closed, and there were some strange numbers and cursors in his field of vision. What's the situation? I'm not dead, and something has changed. Dr. Octopus slowly sat up while thinking. Crack. Because of the support of his right hand, the metal table under him also made a crisp sound, and it was dented under the pressure of his hand. Dr. Octopus raised his hand in disbelief. He first looked at his own body, and then looked around the surrounding environment. In the bright room, there are countless mechanical arms parked on both sides and above. As a scientist, Dr. Octopus quickly realized where this place is. This is a laboratory, Dr. Octopus muttered to himself. His eyes turned and stopped on the right side not far from him, where there was also a naked man with gray skin lying there. When his eyes moved over, the gray-skinned man also opened his eyes and slowly sat up. Ha, it seems that I still narrowly escaped death. Tombstone sat up, looking at the recovered injuries on his body and the stronger strength he felt. He also guessed what happened. Oh, a new face. When the Tombstone looked around, he also saw Dr. Octopus next to him. Seeing this strange face, he asked curiously. Dr. Octopus had already stood on the ground at this time, and while adapting to his body, he walked slowly, while answering the question on the Tombstone. You can call me Dr. Octopus, who are you? At this moment, Dr. Octopus also saw his current appearance from the large mirror in front of him. Mechanism and flesh were mixed together. There was a mechanical eye with red light on the left eye. The tentacles behind him were like a flower about to bloom, slowly extending and blooming. Dr. Octopus can feel the difference in his body. The combination of machinery and flesh makes him stronger now. At the same time, he feels that his mechanical tentacles are also a little different. It seems that the material has become harder and the manipulation is more sensitive. I am. Tombstone also stood on the ground and moved his body at this moment. He was about to answer Dr. Octopus's question, but suddenly the radio sounded in the laboratory. His name is Tombstone. Hello, Dr. Octopus. A thick middle-aged male voice came from the ceiling speaker, and at the same time, the mirror in front of Dr. Octopus suddenly turned into transparent glass. On the other side of the glass, Jin Bing's huge figure was looking at Dr. Octopus through the glass. With a smile on his lips, he told Dr. Octopus and the Tombstone inside about their current situation in a gentle tone. After a while, the two people inside also put on their clothes and walked out of the laboratory. Although I am very grateful to you for saving me, I don't have the hobby or habit of listening to another person give orders. As a great scientist, the only thing that can hold me back is science and research. Dr. Octopus looked up at the smiling Jin Bing. While expressing his gratitude, he expressed his unwillingness to be driven by others with some arrogance. The Tombstone standing behind Dr. Octopus couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth after hearing what Dr. Octopus said, and smiled contemptuously. He was laughing at Dr. Octopus's overreach, but he knew what kind of ruthless character that smiling Jin Bin was in front of him. After waking up from the laboratory, he knew that all of this had a price, so he did not have any surprises or objections to Jin Bing's solicitation. This very strange-looking Dr. Octopus obviously didn't know this, and he really thought that Jin Bing's invitation was so easy to refuse. Just when Tombstone was thinking secretly in his heart and was amused by Dr. Octopus's boldness, Jin Bin, who was still smiling just now, stopped smiling after hearing what Dr. Octopus said, and his face became serious. Jin Bin shook his head, and said in a soft but undeniable tone, "Sorry, Dr. Octopus, I didn't expect to reject this option. If I hadn't spent money and connections to pick you out of that dilapidated factory, you would have turned into a pile of black ash." Dr. Octopus also stopped smiling after hearing Jin Bin's answer, and saw the tentacles behind him slowly raised, staring at Jin Bin closely like several ferocious poisonous snakes. As I said, no one can restrain the great Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus looked at Jin Bin with cold eyes, as if he wanted to test the power of his brand new mechanical tentacles. Hearing the threat of Dr. Octopus who was about to move, Jin Bin grinned disdainfully and said, "It seems that I overestimated you a little bit. Your talents seem to be used in researching science, and you don't even leave a bit of your common sense. Do you think I saved your life for charity? You don't even think about why I woke you up without being fully sure." Looking at the increasingly ugly Dr. Octopus, Jin Bing also continued to sneer mercilessly. "Now you are like an ignorant wild dog baring your dirty teeth, feeling as if you are invincible. As long as I press the button, the chip in your neck will make your head explode." Jin Bing, who was already very strong, lowered his head slightly, looking at Dr. Octopus with a sense of oppression. "So, tell me now, what is your choice? Will you choose to die now or work for me?" Dr. Octopus looked at the button in Jin Bin's hand, and his face became more and more ugly. The words Jin Bin just said were like sharp knives pierced into his heart. Although he really wanted to tear the man in front of him who had humiliated him to pieces, but under the threat of death, he didn't dare to make any real changes. "How is it, Dr. Octopus, have you considered it?" Jin Bing also urged when the pressure had reached its maximum. Dr. Octopus's face was extremely ugly. He was afraid of death, but he didn't want to just admit defeat like this, and become really like the wild dog that Jin Bing just mentioned in his taunt. Looking at the face of Dr. Octopus, Jin Bin also felt that the big stick had hit enough, and it was time to give him a sweet treat and let him go down the steps. His face gradually softened, and a standard smile slowly appeared on his face. "Working for me is not a painful thing. I can give you a lot of money to continue your research." Just like my most capable assistant Alistair, he did not delay his research while working for me. Jin patted Alistair's shoulder and smiled. Hearing Jin Bin's promise, Dr. Octopus's eyes moved a little. After keenly observing this point, Jin Bing also sneered in his heart. Taming a wild dog is very simple. In addition to giving it enough lessons with a whip, and throwing a bone to it at an appropriate time, the effect is often better. Under the bright moonlight, a heavily guarded prison is hidden in a dense forest. It was surrounded by high walls, above which there were guard posts at intervals. Huge and bright searchlights shone back and forth on the ground, guarding against any disturbance. The prison inside the high wall is also heavily guarded. Each exit has several doors, and there are people constantly patrolling and checking between each door. In such a serious atmosphere, a palm-sized mechanical insect was crawling quickly on the high wall. Its color was gray, the main color of the prison, so in the current dim situation, almost no one noticed its existence. In this way, it climbed over the high wall secretly, and then passed through the prison wall inside, and climbed into the cell where its target was. Through the narrow air vent, the mechanical insect fell to the floor of the cell, and then opened its back armor, revealing the things stored inside. The man in the cell also noticed the mechanical insect, and seeing the opened carapace of the mechanical insect, he also sat up from the bed. The bright moonlight just shone on his face through the narrow air vent. His face was as white as the wall gray, and there was not a single hair on his head, which looked like an egg that had been peeled off its shell. This strange man squatted down, and took out a belt with a sapphire inlaid in the middle and a videophone from the open carapace of the mechanical insect. Looking at the familiar belt, the corner of the strange man's mouth also curled into a smile. He put the belt on his waist, and instantly turned into a man in a suit and leather shoes. Turning on the videophone, Alistair's face was immediately revealed. He looked at the changed man and said softly, "Jin, and hello to you, Chameleon." "Thank you, Mr. Jin Bin, for me." Chameleon responded to Alistair very politely. Alistair also continued after hearing the words, "You need to rescue several other people in this prison in the next 15 minutes. They are Thriller, Mysterio, and Scorpion. I think you know them too. Take them to the open field outside in 15 minutes, and a helicopter will pick you up there." "Understood. Thank you, Mr. Jin Bing, for your generosity." Chameleon nodded and said, and Alistair also hung up the phone after hearing this. This man named Chameleon is an internationally renowned criminal. His characteristic is that he can use the belt around his waist to change into anyone's appearance, as long as he uses the belt to take a photo of this person or a photo of him. In a previous employment operation, he was captured in prison by the joint efforts of Spider-Man and S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, for his own plan, Jin planned to get several other famous criminals including him out of prison together. The Thriller, Scorpion, and Mysterio mentioned by Alistair just now have their own special features, and they also have one thing in common, that is, they are all criminals caught in prison by Spider-Man. Horror's real name is Herman Schultz. He was an excellent criminal before he was caught in prison. He was proficient in cracking and robbing various safes. In order to compete with Spider-Man, he also used his excellent mind to create a piece of equipment unique to him. He developed a special glove that can release shock waves, and developed a whole set of yellow lattice electronic suits made of special materials in order to eliminate the anti-shock force of the glove. When he puts on this equipment neatly, he can use the powerful shock waves from the gloves to better commit crimes and the opponent Spider-Man. Peter has worked hard in the process of dealing with him. Like Thriller, Scorpion is also a criminal who has had a lot of troubles with Spider-Man. He was originally just an ordinary person named MacDonald Gargan, a private detective. Once he was hired by James, the boss of the Daily Bugle, to investigate Spider-Man. After being discovered, Peter also approached James very directly, warning him not to do such a thing again, and glued the outrageous MacDonald Gargan to the wall with spider silk. After Spider-Man left, James also vented his anger on MacDonald Gargan, scolding him for being a waste. MacDonald Gargan, unwilling to be humiliated, was determined to change, so he was introduced by James to a scientist. The scientist used the Scorpion's genes and a combat suit to greatly enhance MacDonald Gargan's physical fitness, and he could also use the tail on the combat suit to release a corrosive slime. The changed MacDonald Gargan became the criminal Scorpion under the temptation of power, and caused a lot of trouble for Peter. The criminal finally calmed down until Peter caught him in prison. As for the mysterious guest Quentin Baker, he not only has a feud with Spider-Man, but also has a feud with Venom. In his opinion, he could have killed Spider-Man, but because of Venom's meddling, this made him fall short and was caught in the current prison. In addition to the few people who are going to escape from prison now, Tombstone and Dr. Octopus, who have just woken up, also have a lot of trouble with Venom. The purpose of Jin in getting these people out is to organize a criminal gang that mainly targets Spider-Man and Venom. If one person's strength is not enough, then he will use the power of unity, but this unity is the unity of criminals. After getting back his belt, the chameleon began to seamlessly switch between various identities, playing around with the guards in the prison. He easily opened the cell door of the other three, and then he and they retrieved the equipment from the place where the items were kept. With the equipment, the difficulty of escape for the few people decreased linearly. After rushing out of the prison gate inside, the helicopter Alistair mentioned had already parked in the open space. Kim bought a helicopter with his connections and money to stay here for 5 minutes without attack. In this way, several not-so-simple criminals finally escaped from prison, and were brought to Jinbin's building by helicopter. In Jinbing's building, the helicopter parked on the roof, and several people inside followed the guidance to the designated floor. The elevator doors opened, revealing a sweeping view of the expansive grounds, save for a giant screen hanging above. When Chameleon and others approached, the huge screen also lit up, and at the same time, Dr. Octopus and the Tombstone also walked slowly from the opposite side. "Welcome to regain your freedom, my friends." Jin Bin's figure appeared on the big screen that suddenly lit up, and he looked at the 6 criminals below and said with a smile, "Let me introduce myself. I am Jin Bin. I rescued you from prison to make you work for me." Jin Bin crossed his hands on the table and said directly, "I will give you what you need. Similarly, you need to serve me." Jin Bin. The few people who had just escaped from the prison were also very surprised when they heard the words. They didn't expect that it was this underworld legend that made them escape from the prison. Hearing this name, and thinking of today's very smooth escape from prison, their worries about Jin Bing's identity were immediately dispelled. And only this underworld legend has the energy and connections to fly a helicopter into the heavily guarded prison to pick them up. The escaped chameleon and others looked at each other, and after a while, the mysterious man looked at Jin on the big screen and said softly, "We are honored for your help, but we don't know what you want to do. Within the best of our ability, we will definitely not refuse to repay the help of this jailbreak, but if it exceeds the limit of our ability." The words of the mysterious man largely represent the opinions of the other people. Of course, it is a very happy thing to be able to escape from the prison, but they don't want to just give people free jobs for no reason, and they don't know if there is any danger. You must know that none of them have a law-abiding personality, otherwise they would not become criminals and be imprisoned. Hearing the mysterious man's words, Jin was not surprised. He also knew what these people were like. If he really agreed to him so simply, he would not be so at ease. As a businessman, he has always believed that reciprocal interests are the best way to bind a person. Jin Bin smiled faintly, and then said softly, "I like to communicate with smart people. I need you to help me with a few things and kill a few people. After solving these troubles, you can do whatever you want, and I will give you a lot of money." Of course, the 6 nodded and said, although Spider-Man and Venom were not ordinary enemies, they really hated these 2 guys. "Who is that green guy? I've never seen that black one either." Scorpion looked at the big screen, and the only one he was familiar with was Spider-Man. "The black guy is called Venom, and he only appeared after you guys went to prison. He is more difficult and stronger than Spider-Man. You must go all out to face him, or you will die a miserable death." Tombstone explained to Scorpion with a gloomy face. When he thought of the venom, he felt some pain in his abdomen. Although his wound had healed now, the shadow in his heart would never dissipate. After the Tombstone finished speaking, Jin Bin appeared on the big screen and explained the existence of the Green Goblin. "This green guy is called the Green Goblin. He is a crazy and cruel psychopath. If these targets appear at the same time, I need you to kill this guy first." Jin Bing looked serious and spoke coldly. The people below didn't ask any more questions when they saw this. Seeing this, even a fool would know that Jin Bing had suffered a lot from this Green Goblin guy. After finishing speaking, Jin Bing also restrained his expression, looked at several people and said, "Now that you understand the situation, tell me your answer, my friends." Gigi and the others looked at each other, then nodded and said, "It's such a pleasant cooperation, I can't wait to teach that wall crawler a lesson." There is also Venom. Dr. Octopus also added, looking at the few people who made the decision without any resistance or hesitation. Dr. Octopus also understood how stupid his previous actions were. Although these guys don't have high IQs, they have a deep understanding of Jin Bing. Thinking of this, Dr. Octopus' eyes under the sunglasses also darkened. Now he has an explosive chip behind his neck that can determine his life and death at any time. To be honest, the situation is not as good as these idiots. I can't be enslaved like this forever. The great Dr. Octopus shouldn't be insulted like this. Dr. Octopus gritted his teeth. His face was expressionless, but he was secretly thinking. Next, you can have a good rest. Once there is information on the target and other tasks, someone will notify you. Jin Bin said with a faint smile. I look forward to your victory. When the matter is over, I will prepare a generous gift for each of you, my dear 6 devils. The name of the 6 devils will make the whole of New York terrified. The mysterious man said with a smile. Although he is not strong, he has a lot of resentment towards Spider-Man and Venom. We will tear them into pieces. Dr. Octopus also put away his calculations and spoke cruel words with them. Looking at the few people who were gearing up below, Jin Bing on the opposite side of the screen also crossed his hands, with a faint smile on his face, and sat on the back of the large chair. Now he has also formed his own group of super criminals, which made him feel a little uneasy after being attacked by the Green Devil, and let go of some worries. No one can stop me. No one. Jin Bing turned off the screen, looking at the tall buildings outside the window and muttered. Suck, call. Chen Linan stood on the roof of a building, basking in the sun and breathing in the somewhat cold air. In the past few days, Peter Parker has listened to his opinions very seriously, and he hardly showed up. He concentrated on studying what happened to his body. This inevitably increased Chen Linen's workload, so he was lying on the roof to take some time to rest. New Yorkers and would-be criminals alike were a little taken aback when Spider-Man disappeared, since he hadn't been gone for so long since Spider-Man first appeared. In the past few years, that red and blue figure has been flying among the high-rise buildings in New York every day, and almost all New Yorkers have become accustomed to his existence. So the sudden disappearance of Spider-Man made them all feel astonished. Most citizens were a little worried that the vacancy of Spider-Man would make some crimes unscrupulous, except for James and a small number of people. Although Spider-Man no longer appeared, James made his photos and reports not absent for a day. He thought it was the abominable wall crawler who finally realized his sin and stopped his activities. Unlike the worries of most citizens and James's nonsense, after knowing that Spider-Man has finally disappeared, the criminals who were about to move fell into great joy. They all brought their own weapons, ready to go to the store or on the street to start friendly exchanges with some lucky ones who were alone, and get some money. Some small and medium-sized gangs also took advantage of this opportunity to start concentrated transactions one after another, hoping to take advantage of this vacancy to make a fortune. Imagination is always beautiful, but reality or the blow of Venom is cold and cruel. Criminals and gangs who had various plans were quickly eliminated by Chen Linan after they started taking action. In those few days, the crime rate in New York City increased rapidly, and correspondingly, violent deaths of criminals began to occur frequently. The criminals who were hit hard finally realized that they had overlooked an important issue, that is, although Spider-Man was gone, the Venom was still there. Venom, who was rumored to be a perverted killer, was obviously more ferocious and cruel than Spider-Man, but because his attendance rate was not high before, and most of them were at night, those criminals obviously paid more attention to Spider-Man than Venom. They always had a fluke mentality, thinking that they would not be so unlucky to be caught by the occasional Venom, and what they have encountered in the past few days is to slap these criminals in the face severely. Unlike Peter, who never strikes a dead blow and has to take care of everything, Chen Linan is fast, accurate and ruthless in attacking criminals. He doesn't talk nonsense and doesn't hold back. He is straightforward and never sloppy. Under such circumstances, New York's sudden increase in crime rate began to drop sharply, and it dropped directly to a level lower than when Spider-Man was active. After maliciously speculating about Spider-Man for a few days, James, who has always been not afraid of violence, also turned his guns and started bombarding Chen Linan. Wear it for him. What kind of perverted killer, blood predator, crazy killer, and so on and so on. On the big screen on the opposite side of the building where Chen Linan was, James said nonsense as always. According to the killing methods of the perverted murderer, Venom, he must be an ugly pervert with extremely serious mental illness, because according to criminal psychology analyze. What an annoying old guy. Chen Linan was lying on the concrete fence on the roof of the building, squinting his eyes to relax and complaining about James in a low voice. Maybe I should have left him on the wall the last time I was at the factory and kept him company with Dr. Octopus. Judging by his stinky, hard mouth, maybe his mouth wouldn't hurt if the factory exploded, you know, Bruce. Chen Linan took out his left hand that was under his head, and said while touching the chin of the bat monster statue, as if teasing a dog. Why did I become like Peter? Chen Linan suddenly realized the strangeness of his behavior, so he withdrew his hand again. Thinking of this, Chen Linan couldn't help but wonder in his mind whether Peter's current mutation had been resolved, or what the progress was. After these few days of fighting crime, he was really tired. No wonder Peter didn't have time to fall in love. He was busy enough these days, let alone the nosy Peter. It seems that Venom was right when he said that Peter always likes to eat hot dogs, because if he wanders in New York according to his method, he will indeed not even have time to eat every day. Although Chen Linan was really busy a few days ago, he has slowly started to relax in the past few days. Compared with Spider-Man, his deterrence is indeed much greater, because he is ruthless and ruthless. Just when Chen Linan let go of his thoughts, thinking about when Peter would recover and hurried to work, an aircraft the size of an apple also spotted him. Found target Venom, sending location. A few minutes later, Chen Linan, who was lying down, suddenly felt a sense of danger. The Venom warning sounded crazily, reminding him that a huge danger was approaching. Chen Linan took action quickly when the Venom warning started to sound. He turned over and fell down the building, and then clung to the wall when he was halfway down. Just as he turned over and went downstairs, a slightly viscous strong corrosive liquid fell on the place where he was lying before, eroding most of the stone there in an instant. Chen Linan lay on the wall and narrowed his eyes at the attack. This is an attack method that I have never seen before. Who is this? Just as he was thinking, the Venom warning sounded again. Without hesitation, he immediately started to act and jumped to the roof again. After he fell to the top of the building, the place where he was lying on his stomach just below was also shattered by a powerful shock wave. It's an attack I've never seen before. Chen Linan became vigilant, feeling something unusual. Hey, it's really not simple, but it's interesting in this way. If it's too easy to solve, it's a bit boring. On the top of the opposite building, a person wearing strange equipment spoke. He was wearing a bright yellow jumpsuit covered with black checks, which looked ugly and cool. Of course it's not easy. Have you forgotten what the tombstone said to you? Beside him, a man in a green combat uniform with a strange tail behind him also came up. These are some strange things. Chen Linan looked at the two people opposite, and thought strangely in his heart. Looking at Thriller and Scorpion on the opposite side, Chen Linan also remembered a prison escape incident reported in the news a few days ago. One day, the news headlines were finally no longer about him, so he also learned about several old opponents of Spider-Man that he hadn't seen before. I remembered, you are the criminals who escaped from prison a few days ago, are you Thriller and Scorpion? Chen Linan looked at the two people opposite and said in a calm voice. Seeing Chen Linan, who was not panicking at all, Horror also smiled and said, yes, I am Horror. Enjoy the next battle, because this is your last time in this world. Sorry, I've heard this kind of words too many times. Chen Linan said disdainfully, while pulling out his own two knives. He nimbly pulled a blade, and the cold blade turned into a circular arc. Although I don't know why you don't enjoy the rare freedom, but since you brought it to your door, get ready to go to hell. I won't be merciful to you like Spider-Man. Chen Linan held a knife in both hands in an attacking posture, and his sharp eyes were firmly nailed on the enemy facing him. Then you may not be able to do it anymore. Suddenly another voice came from behind Chen Linan, and he turned his head slightly to look, only to see Dr. Octopus and the tombstone walking out from behind him again. Long time no see, Venom, I've been thinking about you all the time. Dr. Octopus raised the corners of his mouth and showed a cruel smile. The tombstone was also smiling sadly. In their opinion, Chen Linan had only one ending today, and that was to be brutally killed by them. The fate of the two of you is so great that you are still alive. Seeing these two acquaintances, Chen Linan also said in a deep voice. Hearing Chen Linan's words, Dr. Octopus also touched his mechanical left eye, and said in a cold and angry tone, I will return these scars to you one by one. Don't even think about leaving here today. As the voice fell, the mechanical tentacles behind Dr. Octopus also suddenly thrust out, and the new mechanical tentacles were sharper and sharper than the original ones. With the violent sound of breaking through the air, these mechanical tentacles also stabbed at Chen Linan from different directions. Looking at these mechanical tentacles, Chen Linan used the dagger in his hand to block them while moving and dodging flexibly. Chew. While he was dealing with Dr. Octopus's attack, the acidic solution of the scorpion and the terrifying shock wave also hit him. The sound of breaking through the air behind him and the poison warning in his head reminded Chen Linan of danger, and he also jumped towards the roof next to him while dealing with the tentacles. He had to put some distance away and change the position of the enemy and him, otherwise such a back and forth attack would make him very uncomfortable. Where did those tentacles of yours go last time? Let's see your true ability. Dr. Octopus looked at Chen Linan, who had distanced himself from them, and shouted strangely. He was very keenly aware of the difference between Chen Linan and the last time he fought. Although he didn't show any signs of fatigue now, the difference could still be clearly seen in the way he fought. MD. Hearing Dr. Octopus shout, Chen Linan also cursed in his heart. The disadvantage of one person against a group of people is that you have to deal with all the attacks non-stop. In one-on-one, you only need to focus on the opponent. Now in one-on-many, Chen Linan needs to divide his attention into several parts. The sound of bombardment on the roof kept ringing, and several roofs had already been affected by their battles and became dilapidated. Chen Linan landed on the top of a tower, panting heavily with his chest rising and falling. He hardly stopped, he kept dodging and counter-attacking, and most of the time he was dodging. Without the strengthening of Venom, he is indeed very passive, not to mention that there are still several people besieging him. Although he hasn't suffered any injuries yet, he also knows that it may not last long under such continuous high-intensity attacks. High-concentration acidic liquid and shock waves hit again. Chen Linan looked at the roof of the building and jumped again. The expected feeling of falling to the roof did not come, and Chen Linan continued to fall after passing through the roof. It's an illusion. The mysterious guest is here too. Chen Linan quickly shot out a spider thread and stuck it to the side, which prevented him from falling directly to the ground. Just when he turned over and jumped to the top of the low building next to him, and then quickly searched for the enemy, Horror suddenly appeared in front of him, and then raised his hand to send a shock wave to his face. Upon seeing this, Chen Linan hurriedly dodged to the side, but unexpectedly a violent impact came from behind him. Boom! Under the influence of this impact, he was also directly blasted to the other side. Before he could stabilize his body after falling from the air, a green figure suddenly climbed up from the edge of the building. The thick and powerful scorpion tail hit Chen Linan directly in the abdomen, smashing him into the wall of the elevator room. Ahem! Chen Linan endured the pain of broken bones and quickly climbed out of the broken wall. The set of combos just caught him off guard. Although he expected that he might be unable to withstand it, he didn't expect it. Their cooperation can be so close. Hehehehe, it seems that you didn't expect the existence of the two of us. The horror that had just attacked Chen Linan also changed his appearance at this time, turning into a chameleon holding his belt with one hand. Next to the empty building, Dr. Octopus crashed down from above, cracking the ground on the roof. The scorpion who swung Chen Linan's tail also climbed up from the side of the building, smiling strangely at Chen Linan, who was blasted into the wall by his attack. Bang! As a burst of purple smoke dissipated, the remaining mysterious guest, Tombstone and Thriller also appeared. It's ugly and embarrassing, isn't it? The mystery man sneered. He hadn't forgotten the shame of being subdued by the Venom strangling his neck last time. Oh, it's just a group of mobs huddling together to keep warm. Chen Linan leaned against the wall and sneered. Although he was surrounded by several people at the moment, he still mocked in a cold voice, without any feeling of being surrounded. I haven't seen you for a while, and your tongue skills have improved a lot. Did you learn from that annoying wall crawler? The mysterious guest continued to taunt, looking at the stubborn Chen Linan. It's a pity that he hasn't shown up during this time, otherwise we can solve it together. How do you know he didn't come today? Chen Linan suddenly asked them back when he heard the words, and then he looked behind these people and shouted, "Hurry up!" Hearing his low shout, several people subconsciously turned their heads to prepare for Spider-Man's sneak attack. Only Dr. Octopus sensed something was wrong, and immediately reacted as soon as he wanted to turn his head. Be careful, Dr. Octopus immediately reminded them, but Chen Linan took this opportunity to act. The moment those people turned their heads subconsciously, Chen Linan, who was leaning against the wall, immediately rushed out towards Chameleon and Mysterio. Of all the people present, only these two are the weakest, and they are also the most likely targets of the raid. Saw. Chen Linen's ghostly figure appeared in front of the chameleon instantly. While the chameleon hurriedly turned around, the short knife in Chen Linen's hand had already buzzed across the chameleon's neck. Blood spurted out from his broken blood vessels, and Chen Linen had already passed him and came to the mysterious guest. Mysterious guest looked at Chen Linan, who was approaching, his pupils shrank, and he immediately stepped back. His fish tank head was now in front of his eyes, and Chen Linan stabbed it directly with the short knife in his hand while grinning. Crack, crack, with the crisp cracking sound, the head of the fish tank of the mysterious guest shattered to the ground, and the short knife pierced straight into his eyes, and his face was still full of astonishment and fear. This series of actions happened within 2 to 3 seconds, and the others didn't react at all. Only Dr. Octopus sensed the strangeness, so he immediately made a move and grabbed Chen Linan with his mechanical tentacles. The chameleon's throat had already been slit open when the mechanical tentacles started protruding, and they had just come to Chen Linen's back when the head of the fish tank of the mysterious guest was shattered. Bang! Purple smoke diffused from Chen Linan and the mysterious guest. Chen Linen used the props hung by the mysterious guest to hide his figure. Dr. Octopus felt that his tentacles had caught something, but he failed to catch it. When the smoke cleared, Chen Linen's black figure was gone on the roof. Dr. Octopus withdrew his mechanical tentacles. There was an obvious trace of blood on the cold mechanical claws. Although his tentacles attacked very quickly, they were still a step too slow and did not cause serious damage to Chen Linan. It was almost there. Looking at the two corpses lying on the ground, the tombstone cursed in a low voice with a dark face. None of them expected that Venom could escape today. They thought that under the siege of the 6 of them, Venom would have a dead end today, but they didn't expect that he would use some tricks to distract him for a while during the siege. It's not that you are so stupid that you can even take the bait in such a trick, Dr. Octopus said with a cold snort. If he hadn't been fooled just now, he felt that Venom could even take advantage of that time to kill another person. Hearing Dr. Octopus' disdain, Scorpion also turned his head and roared angrily, "What do you mean? You stinky octopus with 6 arms." Horror and Tombstone also turned their heads to look at Dr. Octopus with unkind faces. They did not accept that Dr. Octopus was wearing this hat. "You'd better be careful what you say, Otto," Tombstone warned coldly while pinching his fingers. "Are you going to blame us for this incident?" Horror's hands circulated a shockwave ready to go. HMPH. "Why, do you want to fight with me?" Dr. Octopus raised his mechanical touch, and mocked with disdain on his face. "It's just because the combined IQ of all of you doesn't exceed. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.